Perfect. And I'm glad we're starting to record now. So we just full disclosure, we're just kind of working real time with some of our AV. So I'm just going to check with folks online. Let's see here. John or Susan, can you hear me okay? Can you, John?
Yeah,
Yeah,
sounds great. Thank you.
perfect. John,
Really good.
and you're loud and clear in here. Like, no joke, loud and clear. Perfect. All right, and folks online, you're more than welcome to have your cameras on, particularly as we get started this morning. We'd love to see you. And John, no, it's not for you to be quieter. It's the volume here in the room. You're all good. Well, we'll start off with a few welcomes today, and then I'll go through the agenda and we'll do some introductions. But just to start off with, I wanted to hand the microphone to Jeff Huntington with the Governor's Natural Resource Office to give us a little bit about why we're here today. And then I'll hand it to Debbie and Sarah with Department of Fish and Wildlife and Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board.
I'm afraid you kind of got the B team here today. Chandra Ferrari is really the genius behind a lot of this executive order, and she has the flu. So I told her to stay far away. I didn't want to see her on the screen because that's too close to the flu as far as I'm concerned. So I have to be someplace else. So I'm going to kick things off and turn it over to Debbie and Sarah, who have been the geniuses about how to begin to implement this and really the framing of what we're hoping for today. You know, the why of this started a couple of years ago when we started talking about how this administration could relate to natural resources and the natural resource cabinet relate to the governor's intentions about how to move the state forward in a way that's consistent with her values and her pragmatism. And we had a lot of conversations with different folks, and then at the cabinet level with the directors. And out of that, we really came to the fact that this executive order is really supposed to be the North Star for our natural resource agencies to help knit together a more cohesive approach around some commonality that all of our agencies have. We spent a lot of time together as a cabinet with directors of 14 different agencies, talking about how they relate to each other and how to build more out of the sum of our different parts. But we really felt like we had to have this articulation of how to do that better and with more sense of purpose around doing more of what's going to be important moving forward and less of maybe what we've been doing over the last decade or 2 decades as agencies get layer upon layer of rules and statutes and all of the things that occupy a lot of time. So the executive order is seen to be the North Star. The attributes piece of it for me is like the compass that's going to help articulate with a little bit more of what the pathway is toward that North Star that links us all together. And so we looked at the attributes and said, if we had a set of things that indicate or define resiliency a little bit better in the context of natural and working landscapes and waters, then any of the 14 agencies could look at that list of attributes and say, okay, if these are the things that will help or position Oregon to be better situated 10 years from now in the face of climate change and the impacts of climate change, if these are the things that we should be we know there's a scientific basis or a social basis for saying if we do more of this, we'll be better off than if we keep doing everything that we're doing today. Then that would allow agency directors to begin to knit together their work plans of how to triangulate toward that North Star of resiliency in the face of a changing climate. I think it's a really interesting dynamic that I haven't seen in my career in the natural resource cabinet of Oregon agencies. And I think it's got real potential to help give any particular agency a little bit better compass of how to get to something that's going to be more meaningful, given the challenges that we're facing. And I will say this is not to be constrained by budget, but with purpose, the executive order does not depend in its implementation upon new funds or a direction from the governor of you shall do this. It really was set up to give the agencies the guideposts so that they could select a path, and we could create a storyline of how the agencies could orient toward adjusting to the changing conditions that we all sense and see on natural and working landscapes and our waters. So I so appreciate the fact that you're going to spend the time today. I've seen charrettes do magical things when a bunch of smart people get together and have a focus but a request to be creative. And I think that's what we're after today and tomorrow and the next. And I will be dropping in and out given what I've got to do over the next couple of days, but I really look forward to seeing the results. And thank you so much for your time and your thoughts and your expertise. We really appreciate it. All right.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it. Sarah and Debbie, I'll have you come up. I've got one mic. Would you like two?
We can pass it back and forth. We have a little stand-up routine.
I can't wait.
Debbie's going to start. I think we can go forward to the slide that says ODFW and the web. Jeff delivered all of Chandra's content without the slides.
So just to introduce myself, I'm Debbie Colbert, and I'm the director of the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and just really excited to be kicking off these 3 days with all of you. And want to just give a shout out to Bobby and Oregon Consensus, because I'm just going to tell you that when Sarah and I were comparing notes, when we saw the executive order and we saw our names as responsible for this attribute part, there was a little bit of a panic. And so just so grateful for Oregon Consensus stepping in and literally setting the table. So for the next 3 days, I guess just from my perspective, just kind of building on what Jeff just said, as agencies, and I think we all experience this, there's just always too much to be done, right? You start your day thinking these are the things you're gonna get done, and by 10 o'clock, everything's kind of flipped on its head, and you're having to focus on other stuff. And what I really appreciate about the governor's executive order is that it is really helping us to carve out the time as agencies and as a state to be intentional about thinking about the future. And, there are so many things that we can do that are good things that we can do on the ground. And when you put it in the context of these attributes, we start thinking about it from a longer perspective and going, if I'm going to work here or I'm going to work here, how do I decide? What's going to have the long-term biggest bang for the buck? As an agency, as a state. And so we're just really excited about the governor's executive order and just having so many smart people here to help us with this effort. I would just say that it's a little bit of a therapy session that I'm going to give you here, because this is what Sarah and I have been doing, because we're like, oh my gosh, it's going to get messy. It's going to get really messy, and it's not going to be perfect. We're not at 3 days. We're not going to come. So I'm just going to do that for you. So next 3 days, it's going to be messy, and that's okay. That's the intent. Like, let's just get it all out there and let's work through the exercise together and be open to looking at it from many different directions. That's why we have all of you here with your different ways of viewing these attributes and helping to inform these discussions. And then also recognize that we probably won't get this perfect at the end of 3 days, but we're going to have some really good stuff to work with and to go from there. So I think that's it for me. How about you, Sarah?
I will share just two quick, it's hard to know what to do with that, huh? I feel like Geraldo or something. I want to share two things that honestly I think Chandra might also add if she were here, related to how we think about the intersection of people and nature in this conversation, and also just kind of reflecting who are the people in the room and who might we be talking to next. So actually, can we go back one slide? I think it might have been in there, maybe. This is one more, sorry. How we think about people and nature, I think is something that's likely to come up in a lot of our conversations today. So I just want to flag it. This is not a conversation about how much land can we protect, lock up, like what is our target for land and water protection legally. That's a tool in the toolbox. And setting up this conversation, we wanted to really be clear that we're talking about a diversity of kinds of human actions, stewardship, restoration actions. There's a lot on the table in terms of, you know, how we get to resilient landscapes and therefore how we might define resilient lands and waters. So I just want to create some intentional space for that and make it clear that that's on the table. And that was very much on our minds as we were setting this table, is to think about how active human stewardship plays a role in meeting the goals that we are about to help define here. The second what is the second? Oh, the second is that we all know that human and community resilience is really important in the face of climate change. And it is something that will be in our minds as we work through this. But the focus of this effort around attributes is on resiliency of lands and waters. Okay, so we'll see a lot of touch points with community and social resiliency, but just know that there is a separate human community resiliency effort ongoing within the state enterprise at this point, and kind of following a similar trajectory that will really focus on that. I do also really want to note who's in the room with us today. A lot of folks were able to make it, a lot of folks weren't. Jeff described Debbie and I as geniuses, I think, in the introduction, which is a nice thing to hear from your boss on any day. And I think the moment of genius that I think we did have was we looked at that thing and we were like, we're going to need to ask some smart people to help us. And we probably want to do this in a couple sequences. And so the table that we've set today is folks who have a lot of content expertise, in part because many of you have undertaken this kind of effort before, whether it was climate specific, whether it was more heavy on the, you know, implementation versus the broad vision spectrum. Some folks have built really similar structures and plans that are not focused on climate resiliency, but can be a really useful model. Some of you have worked with a diversity of communities and municipalities and other sectors to build really similar attributes and plans. And that's the table we tried to set here, was rather than calling you all individually and saying, how did you do this and how should we do it? We decided to kind of get everybody in one room, ask the experts for advice before our first draft, that then we will share with folks that represent different interests, different communities. And so there really was an effort to bring folks from around the geography of Oregon, from a diversity of perspectives, from a diversity of kinds of expertise. And also, we know that there's a lot of work still to do in saying, okay, here's kind of the straw man draft that comes out of this workshop. How do our friends in the working lands community, who are interest groups, are folks that are working actively in land and water stewardship and conservation, view these and accept that feedback and alter our work as we go? So see this as kind of building up to a first draft, rather than we're going to bring you all the big stuff and you tell us about it. That's the next phase to come, when we're going to really broaden this circle and ask a broader diversity of folks to provide feedback on the outcomes of today. So that's the iterative part. I have a microphone and I don't know what the next step is, which is always an awkward situation to be in, but Bobby is always here in this kind of situation. Who do I hand it off to now, Bobby? Sorry.
Have you said what you wanted to say?
I have said what I wanted to say, and except for the thing that I will think about in 30 seconds. Thank you all so much for being here.
Perfect. And I'm gonna, Aaron or Kim, are you able to advance the slides backwards just a little bit for me, or Rob? Oh, thank you, Robin. We skipped over the agenda overview and a little bit of just kind of housekeeping stuff. So I wanted to do that with us, and then we'll do some introductions. But I'm sure as you notice, we have a lot of guests with us online today. We're gonna have our online guests with us today, tomorrow, and the day after. So anybody can join online. If you have your grandmother, your aunt, your uncle, your spouse, your kids who wanted to participate, so we've got an opportunity to do that. We'll stop at 2 key spots throughout the course of the 3 days to hear from our online audience. And then, as Sarah mentioned, there'll be plenty of opportunities for feedback from folks who weren't here, and we really want to hear from everybody who's online as well. For folks who haven't discovered, the restrooms are kind of out the door around to the left. We've got coffee and tea and snacks. Thank you, Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, for that. We'll feed you. Thank you, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, for that. Giant thank yous to Michelle and Myrna and the whole IT team here at ODFW for getting us set up. You've done a ton of work, even just getting ready for today. So thank you for that. Agenda overview, we've done the welcoming. We're going to do some introductions and framing. We'll pause to kind of hear from folks online what their vision for a resilient set of lands and waters are in Oregon. We'll take a little break. Then reflections on what is an attribute to you? What does that mean? What's an indicator? What's a metric? Just making sure we're all kind of on the same calibrated page on what those things mean for the purposes of the next couple of days. Then we'll do some breakout work. You'll notice that there's maps in front of you. If you didn't get a chance to look at the memo for the background memo that we sent out in advance, we are going to use it, particularly section 4. If you wanted to cram, now's a real good time to do that before those breakout sessions. We have printouts at the back and we can bring them by for you. But one of the questions we're going to ask of those attributes is like, how close were those? Was it like halfway there, 10% of the way there, totally wrong, and we're going to start over? That's okay. We're going to use those maps in front of you to really, ideally by the end of today, get to a set of draft attributes for Oregon's land and waters and kind of ask you what's different about an attribute on habitat connectivity in the Klamath from something up in the Columbia, from something different on the coast. And then we're going to end the day kind of saying, okay, this is as far as we got as content experts. We're going to be having a chance to talk with some of Oregon's 9 tribes tomorrow morning. What questions do we have for the tribes? What questions do we have for agencies? And then day 3 is kind of the chance to kind of really put the practical application hat on. So today is a little bit dreamy. Day 3 is like, how's this actually going to work? What's actually going to change in terms of how programs are delivered, funding investments get changed, and how would you actually use these in Oregon? And so similarly, if we come out of the end of today with 100 attributes, that's not ideal, right? Because if we have 100 priorities, we don't have any priorities. So just kind of thinking through that over the course of the day. A couple of just basic guidelines for folks online. Feel free to use that chat if you'd like, just to make a comment. We're not going to be monitoring it very directly. It's not a great place for dialogue. There's the spot at 10:15 is the best way to get a hold of us and kind of hear what you have to say. Otherwise, feel free to email me or anybody else afterwards and we can kind of bring you in that way. For folks in the room, Jeff mentioned be curious. Today, I don't care who you work for. I particularly don't care which state agency you work for. I care what's in your brain and what your experience is. So that's what you're bringing today. State agencies get to bring their identities a little bit more on day 3. The other piece is, and I have this problem as an extrovert, I don't know if everybody heard the acronym WAIT, like, why am I talking? Think about that as a way to kind of take a step back and make room for others to join. If you're an introvert and you need time to process, think about why am I not talking? Like, we really want to hear from you, and maybe it takes you 3 days to process. That's cool. We still want to hear from you, but if we really like you to step up today too. So those are just some guidelines as we get going. Any questions on the overall agenda? When we're going to feed you, when we're going to get done, how that's going to work? Important question. I've got a reservation for 20 for dinner tonight. Who's joining us for dinner? Just so I can get a quick show of hands. Okay, elbow more people. I see 10. I see 10. So I'm going to drop my reservation down to 15. If you didn't raise your hand and you change your mind, come talk to me. Okay. With that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here a little bit, and then we're going to go online. And for our online folks, really interested in the question of, like, imagine that you're standing on top of a mountain, or you're standing in the middle of your favorite prairie, you're in a forest. Imagine your favorite landscape in Oregon, and imagine that that's resilient. Talk to us a little bit about what you see. So what would be the attributes of a resilient landscape that you really care about in Oregon? We want to hear from you. And then the second part about that, is there any kind of definitions of success? If this group is wildly successful at the end of 3 days, what would we have accomplished? So we'll go online. I know we have a number of folks. If you want to kind of chime in, feel free to turn on your camera. Kim, thank you for that. Feel free to just drop a note in chat, and Kim and Aaron here will get that. And actually, Nell, you came on. I'm just checking time real quick. Nell, I'm going to ask you, because you were came on camera first. Would it be helpful if we did a round of introductions here in the room first, so you know who you're talking to?
Yes, that would be excellent.
Let's go ahead and do that. So I'll start with our Oregon Consensus team and kind of the core OWEB and ODFW team, and then we'll just go around. 3 questions. Name, who you work for. I know I said I don't care, but other people might. And then what is your resilient superpower that you want people to know about today? So for example, I'm Bobby with Oregon Consensus, and I am really good at synthesis. Kim, I'm going to hand it to you, and then Aaron, and then Robin.
Good morning, everyone. Kim Hack Davidson. I'm with Oregon Solutions, a sister program to Oregon Consensus, and I am delighted to be here. And the first thing that came to mind was I'm a mom, so I feel like resilience, there's a lot wrapped up in creativity. So that's what popped to my mind.
Thank you. I'm Erin Harms. I work for Oregon Consensus. And the first thing that came to me was my ability to stay calm in an emergency.
And you're noticing for the mic, you got to pick up a mic. Go ahead and grab it.
Hi, everybody. Robin Harkless. I direct the Oregon Consensus program. Super, super happy to be here. I think maybe my superpower is helping bring people together, which is good for my job. So.
And then Liz.
I'm gonna bend over. Hi, I'm Liz Oliver with Oregon Consensus. I would say my resilient superpower, definitely for this effort, was research.
A lot of the memo that you read was Alexa and then Sarah.
Hi, good morning. I'm Alexa Schmidt with the Watershed Enhancement Board. And I would say that my resilient superpower is connecting dots and seeing just intersections between different ideas and concepts.
And good morning, everyone. I'm Sarah Reif with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. And I'm just so happy to see all of you here with us today. Really appreciate it. I think my resilient superpower is my sense of humor, even when things get really nasty and complicated. So that's what I'm here for today.
Morning, everybody. Stephanie Page, Deputy Director at the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. I, like many of you, am really mission driven. So I just really love Oregon's fish and wildlife and landscapes. And so I just try to keep that in mind throughout the work that I do.
Hello again, Debbie Colbert, Fish and Wildlife. And I think resiliency superpower would be pattern recognition.
Hi, Sarah O'Brien, Director of Oregon's Watershed Enhancement Board, OWEB. I'm good. It's okay. Thanks. Adaptability is my, yeah, actually, adapting to change is my resiliency. I don't mind the shocks and the tumult.
Nice. I think that's our core team from OWEB and ODFW and Oregon Consensus. So anything throughout the course of the day, if you have questions, feel free to pull any of us aside. We've got you both over the course of the next couple of days and then after this. Jason, if you don't mind, let's start here and we'll just go Kristen on down the line, and then we'll go back to the table there with Heather. And these come out too. So if you'd rather do that than pull the whole stand, you can.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jason Sauer. My superpower is not remembering names, but I will say Sarah actually took mine. I was going to say adaptability, and I'm from Oregon Department of Energy.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Kirsten Green. I'm the Deputy Director and I serve as the Tribal Liaison at the Department of Land Conservation and Development. Our ecosystem, our superpowers, supporting communities to protect ecosystem function across 19 statewide land use planning goals, everything from agriculture to the ocean. So thank you.
Good morning. My name is Troy Abercrombie. I'm with the Oregon Department of Agriculture. I like to think of myself as a button pusher and a lever puller, a kind of a facilitator and logistics guy, but that usually means that I'm throwing monkey wrenches. So I'd say that's throwing monkey wrenches into the best laid plans of folks is my superpower.
I'm Heather Tallis. I'm at the University of California, Santa Cruz. I'm a scientist, but I would say my superpower is keeping it real.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Dallas Holdefries. I work for Sustainable Northwest. I think my superpower is probably a delusional sense of optimism most of the time.
Morning, everybody. Herb Winters. I'm the district manager for the Gillum SWCD. I think my resilient superpower is maybe coming up with unique solutions on Oregon's private working lands.
Hi, everybody. I'm Eleanor Gaines. I am with Institute for Natural Resources at Portland State. I think my superpower is persistence. Just keep plugging away.
Hi, everybody. Jessie Kirshner. I'm with Oregon Sea Grant. And I'd say my resilient superpower is probably listening and helping to make people feel like their input is incorporated and heard by somebody.
That's really nice. Yours was nice. I'm Nicole DeCrapio. I'm the executive director of the Marys River Watershed Council. My superpower is nihilism, which helps me see things in a different way. That's all.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Spencer Sawaski with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. My superpower is more on the technical side, so trying to quantify the water quantity and quality needs of fish and wildlife.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Sarah Deardahl. I'm the Northwest Region Director at American Rivers, and I love these superpowers. I think mine is making small problems bigger.
It's gonna be a fun couple days. Mark, let's go with you and we'll go around that way.
Thank you. So my name is Mark Webb, Executive Director for Blue Mountain Forest Partners. Maybe one skill is analysis, big picture analysis.
Rachel Weedham with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. Everyone's taking the good words, so I will say my superpower is skepticism.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Andrea Hansen. I work for Oregon Parks and Rec. I would say my superpower is undying passion for natural resources conservation.
Good morning. My name is Annette Leba, and I am the Technical Services Division Administrator at the Oregon Water Resources Department. And I would say my superpower is creating and maintaining forward momentum.
Hi there, I'm Becky Flickcroft. I'm with the Pacific Northwest Research Station of the USDA Forest Service. And I think my superpower is probably science translation and communication.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jeff Snyder. I'm a retired professor, and my superpower right now is I get to serve as a driver for her. Because if you'll notice, she has a little boot on her ankle.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tim Holschbach. I serve as the Deputy State Forester with the Oregon Department of Forestry. I'd say my superpower is connecting people, programs, and processes to meet a desired outcome.
Oh, yeah.
I'm Andy Magi with Pew Charitable Trust, and I think a lot about how we structure complex ideas so they can stay simpler, because I need them to be simple.
Through there. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Rich from Echo Northwest, and I love doing puzzles. So that I think in this context means bringing pieces together in ways that create understanding and connect people.
Hi, I'm Josh Seeds. I'm with Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. I think my resilient superpower is probably making do with limited resources, and both personally and professionally. But also like having an eye for like efficiency in an ecological sense.
Kathy McDonald, I'm the chair of the Oregon Climate Action Commission, and I think my superpower is trying to listen to find solutions that work for lots of different interests in Oregon.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. I'm Peter Harkema with Farmers Conservation Alliance, and I think my superpower is, like Andy, simplifying complexity.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mike Hudson, and I work for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I'm the Regional Climate Change Coordinator for Pacific Northwest and Pacific Islands. I want to thank everyone who also has that superpower of humor. That came across very well. I would say that my superpower may be having an open mind and hearing a variety of perspectives and information provided.
We'll just lean this way. Good morning, everybody. I'm Bill Ryan. I'm the Deputy Director at the Oregon Department of State Lands, and my superpower would be pragmatic optimism.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Ryan Haugo, Director of Conservation and Science for the Nature Conservancy in Oregon. So many good superpowers already. I think it's been said, but I also love making connections between people and ideas and concepts.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Pete Caligieri. I lead our dry forest and fire program for the Conservancy in Oregon. I would say my superpower is probably some sort of humility that I don't know a lot and probably sadly never will understand or know a lot. And that helps me look at problems differently.
Nice. Did everybody get a chance to say hi who wanted to? I know Michelle and Marina, you didn't want to say hi, but hello. So we got everybody? Cool. And Nell, I'm going to ask you, how was the audio in the room as we went around? Did you hear everybody okay?
Yep, that was great.
Amazing, good. So for folks online, I'm going to just say two more quick things here real quick, and then I'm going to turn it to you. But if you'd like to speak, go ahead and raise your hand, and that'll get a cue going for us here as we go along. But this is also just a good chance to take a note. We're going to have different people kind of joining us in each day. Today was really focused on what we call content experts, which to us are folks trained in Western science, folks with traditional ecological knowledge, folks with lived experience, all three really important forms of knowledge. That was the focus for today. You'll see tomorrow the focus is in the morning is really on the tribes experience. And so we're hoping to have at least three of the tribes join us tomorrow morning. And then day 3, we're calling implementers and agencies or managers. So those are the folks who would actually be applying the stuff on the ground. So just notice who's not here. There's always people in a room who aren't here, whose perspectives aren't in the room, and making sure that we're able to pull those perspectives in at a different time as well. And then also, it's just out of the corner of my eye, if I see hands go up or other things, I'll turn and see if you need to say something. So any questions on that at all? Okay, all right. So we'll go Nell and then Meg. And again, the two kind of questions is if you were standing in your favorite kind of landscape, how would you know it's resilient? And what would a definition of success kind of this workshop and next steps look like for you? So Nell, go ahead.
Thank you. And also awesome to hear from everybody in the room. That was inspiring. My name is Nell Scott. I am currently the Oregon State Director for Trout Unlimited, but I just started in that role a few months ago. And for the last 12 years, I've managed our Klamath restoration program for Trout Unlimited and been based in Klamath Falls. So I'm still in Klamath. And living in a high desert ecosystem in Oregon, my vision is a little different than a West Side vision might be, but it would be really looking at a landscape, and instead of seeing just like tiny, thin little threads of green rivers through the landscape, really seeing more broad swaths of green through the landscape. So having those rivers be those riparian areas and those wetlands and those rivers be a more dominant feature on the landscape, and not just those very narrow, which is really common in our high desert landscape, is just having those very narrow ribbons of green. And then I think for a vision for the workshop, I really like that. I liked what you said about if we have 100 priorities, we don't have any priorities. And I think that there is so much to do, and there's so much that's important. I think the goal of being able to actually prioritize and work with everybody to figure out what, not that everything isn't important, but figure out what is the focus for this effort, I think is going to be really important. So happy to be here.
I imagine, Meg, you can't hear me unless I'm on a mic, right?
I can hear you a little bit when you're not next to the mic.
Meg, you're up.
Hi, I'm Meg Reed. I'm the coastal policy specialist at the Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development. So I work with Kirsten Green, who's in the room there. I work specifically on the coast, and so for me, thinking about landscapes and resiliency would be kind of space, which I think, Nellie, you kind of touched on too. And so like having the space for erosion to happen and it not be super impactful, having the space for flooding to happen and it not be super impactful, having the space for wetlands to migrate upstream and not be blocked by structures and things like that. So like just that idea of having enough landscape space for changes to happen and resilience to be an outcome of that. Thanks.
All right, can you hear me online, folks? Just give me a nod. Okay, Gui, if I pronounce that right.
You did, yep. So I'm Gui Kirchner. I am with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife in the Marine Resources Program out on the coast in Newport. And I think one really important component of resiliency to me is thinking about and including the connectivity from the headwaters out to the continental shelf in the ocean, and how each component is connected and influences the components, not only downriver, obviously, but also as that water cycle comes back on land, from the ocean back on land. And I think that's a really important piece that we often don't think of when we think of, the different, we kind of silo different parts of the system.
Yeah, Gui, thank you for that. And I think just for folks in the room too, I think the connectivity example is a good one just to sit with a little bit, right? If we just say connectivity, that's not quite specific enough to be useful, right? And so, Gui, you were giving us this idea of headwaters to ocean and I want us to also be thinking about how would you know that when you saw it? And how would that play out? Like if we were hearing from Nell about, ribbons of stream and riparian areas and floodplain, how would connectivity play out in that kind of landscape in a Klamath or that kind of landscape in an estuary, right? So we want to hit something that's broad like connectivity, but then how would you know it when you see it? We don't need to get way, way, way down into the weeds on every single piece of habitat on what connectivity means, but we're aiming for that middle elevation.
All right, Susan.
Hey, good morning. Thank you. My name is Susan Chambers. I'm Deputy Director of the West Coast Seafood Processors Association. I'm based in Coos Bay, but our headquarters are in Astoria. So we just kind of building off what Gwei just talked about, when I think of resiliency, I think of, well, primarily the ocean because, we depend on the ocean for seafood products, but, we are the companies that, sit where the ocean meets the land. So we also deal with land issues. So I think of it as, you know, uh, keeping that area specifically or particularly, productive, and so that we don't we have a productive environment in the ocean, but with all of our land work, we also have a minimal impact on that. So the land processes are successful as well.
All right, John.
Hi, John Fisher, scientist with Pew Charitable Trusts. Probably took me about 20 years, but I think I've gotten pretty good at distilling complex science into something actionable. And so I really liked what Nell said about making sure we actually get over the finish line with something feasible. I feel like most of my career is building things that were too slow, too expensive, too complicated, and they ultimately died. So I would love to have something simple enough we're confident in. And I guess the only other thought about resilience is in some of the pre-reads, there's a lot of great attributes, but making sure we're thinking about both the patch level, but also the system level, because those attributes will show up really differently depending on which lens you take. Thanks.
Jessica?
Good morning. I'm Jessica Homiak. I'm the Director of Environmental Research for Weyerhaeuser Company. Thinking about resiliency, what came to mind for me is just incorporating aspects from the social, the biologic, and the economic. I think we heard a little bit about that too. I just want to acknowledge that if you don't know somebody's names, it seems like you can yell Sarah and you'll hit about half the audience, because I kind of lost track of how many Sarahs there are in the room too. So anyways, thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, Christine.
Yeah, I'm Christine Shirley. I am participating as a research assistant at OCRI, the Oregon Climate Research Institute. And I'm a big picture person. I see the big picture and try and put elements into that bigger picture. And for me, a resilient landscape is noisy with birds and wildlife and water and fish and all that good stuff.
Thank you. Whitney?
Hi, everybody. I'm Whitney Dorr. I'm at the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, and I work in our Office of Greenhouse Gas Programs. It's great to be here today. And I would say that some of my superpowers for resiliency are being flexible, being a good listener, and brainstorming solutions. And specifically to your question, Bobby, about what do you see in a resilient landscape? I think about our youth and the younger generations and how we're engaging them in these conversations. And to me, often I try and bring my kids out to the spaces I love. And so I think resiliency to me is thinking about how we're talking about it with those we love around us.
Jane.
Hi, everybody. Jane Rombouts with Oregon Department of State Lands. I work in the Aquatic Resource Management Group in mitigation. My title is Mitigation Coordinator. So I'd say our mitigation group spends a lot of time thinking about how to maximize, especially compensatory mitigation projects where we have an opportunity to look at restoration and getting back wetland and stream functions. So I think for myself, think about what would be successful. I would be looking out at a mitigation project with a stage 0 restoration and some beavers and a reconnected floodplain nearby a community, so providing a lot of ecosystem services and open green spaces. So that's what we think about, like how to maximize what we're doing. And what to get out of this, I am hoping we can maximize coordination with other groups and agencies where there is overlap on similar goals.
Yes, there's more than one Bobby too. Bobby Hayden.
Good morning, everybody. I am the other Bobby, Bobby Hayden with the Pew Charitable Trusts. Thank you all for hosting this. I would say I would plus one what Meg Reed said about space to migrate, sea level rise, and all that. Most of my work for Pew is in the coastal zone, so those are top of mind for me. In terms of resilience, I'm thinking about a situation where science continues to drive management decisions. And to my colleague John's point, like we got to make it simple and doable enough, but just to be assured that science really does drive management. And I understand that is part of like ensuring that natural resource agencies are well resourced. So that's what's resonating for me right now.
Anybody else online? I'm going to turn to folks in the audience too, if there's any reflections or questions you had for folks that just offered some of the attributes here in just a second. Yeah, Randy. Oh, great. We got Randy, then Steve.
Good morning, Randy Wiest, Range Lead, Department of State Lands. And I guess for me, resilience kind of as a healthy, functioning, working landscapes.
Steve?
Just real quick, Steve. Randy, when you say healthy functioning, what does healthy functioning mean to you?
Healthy functioning is, you know, species that are supposed to be there are there in the compositions that they're supposed to be in, essentially. And that can vary for various different ecosystems around the world. So, and I guess my superpower is being in the field and not speaking. So,
Okay, now Steve.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Steve Rondo, Natural Resources Director for the Klamath Tribes. I think if I was choosing superpower, it would be intergenerational stewardship or the reciprocal relationship with the land. So having a close connection to the land and understanding that.
Cool, thank you. And thank you for the patience as there's the downtime as I walk from wherever I'm pacing from to a microphone. Is any questions or reflections for what you all heard? Things like, oh, I heard this, help me describe that a little bit more. Or I see how this is connected to that. Did you mean that? Debbie?
One thing that occurred to me, it's such a good question, you know, looking at a landscape and what would it look like? I was reflecting about, you know, we're at what, 31% snowpack going into this year's, you know, summer. And I mean, like, I am really worried about our fire season. And so I can't tell you exactly what it would look like, but what I would feel differently if we truly were in a place where we were securing resilient landscapes, I would feel a lot less worried about going into those kinds of scenarios because we would have done the work on the ground, perhaps to know that, okay, we're gonna get through this. Like, you know, so it's not what would it look like, but it's kind of like what would feel different for me.
Yeah, that's a great way to be thinking about it. So you notice I was, for folks in the room, I was writing a bunch of stuff on pink Post-its. So as I was listening to what folks were saying online, I was trying to write down the different attributes that people were writing down. In a little bit, we're gonna ask you to start doing that exact same thing. Is thinking about when I was asking Randy, like, what would a healthy functioning working landscape look like? It's like the species are there in the composition that they're supposed to be there. It's like, okay, that's an attribute. Let's put that on the map. Let's talk about that in just a second. Because that's going to be important for us to calibrate what we're actually talking about when we go there. Anything else from kind of interaction with folks online, other reflections anybody wants to offer? Oh. Yeah, Kristen.
Sorry, I was a little outline there. I was so excited though by what Randy had said because it really helped me distinguish between an attribute and a metric. So I'm probably on day 3 already. I apologize. So trying to come back to day 1 here. Thank you.
No, it's back where we're going right now. Oh no. I'm good.
I think the other thing for me that is kicking around in my brain as I'm listening here is the need for, like, this is going to be dynamic, right? It's not going to be static because it's going to mean something different in different situations, in different years. Like, so something around it being dynamic is the other thing that's coming up for me.
I'm just going to talk because we seem to have the time. But in listening to some of these recent thoughts, and species being in places they're supposed to be, and this idea of being dynamic, there's things that we're not going to be able to change. The fact of the matter is that snowpack may be very much less in the future than it is now. That's going to have an impact on what species can be supported. So for this to be successful, it might be worth trying to think about what success looks like over time and what resilience looks like over time. Because if we're trying to maintain the status quo for the next 100 years, that may not be successful.
I think that's a really important concept. When I think about resilience, one of the key components is adaptability. And so to the point about flexibility or adaptability, or I think Debbie, you said it really well. What are we going into? There's a future element to this. So landscapes that are resilient aren't just resilient today, but they're adaptable and able to be bounced back or managed or restored based on future conditions. So there's like kind of we have a lot of smart data that points us in a direction and we can kind of make some assumptions, but it is a moving target, but it is about adaptability.
Let me just check with folks. We're running a little bit ahead of time and we're starting to what does resilience mean? Resilience to what? What is an attribute? What is an indicator? I'm kind of inclined to dive in, but I'm also a camel who doesn't take breaks. So do you want to break for 10 quick minutes, get some stretch, re-up coffee, and then come back? Okay, let's go ahead and do that. It is now what, 10 o'clock? 9:56. All right, let's come back at 10:06. Okay, 10:06. Coffee, tea, restrooms out, and we'll come back to talk about what is resilience, what's an indicator, what's an attribute, resilience to what, so we're all on the same page. And Troy, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Troy Baker. I'm the Water Resources Program Manager for the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. And you know what? I'm not sure what my superpower would be. I have to think about that one for a bit.
No problem. We'll come back sometime in the next couple of days and we'll get that from you. All right, let's go ahead and share the screen. We started just before break starting to talk about what resilience is to us. And so did everybody get a copy who wants a copy? I'm down to 2, so it feels like y'all did. What's that? Okay. Did everybody who wanted a copy of the background memo get a copy? All right. And for folks online, we pushed that link out to the OWEB project page that's got the link to it online. But if you look at the memo, there is a definition of resilience. It's at the bottom of page 2. As stated in Executive Order 2526, the Oregon State Legislature established a definition of climate resilience in House Bill 3409 as the capability to anticipate, prepare for, respond to, and recover from significant climate-related threats while minimizing damage to social well-being, the economy, and ecosystem functions. By no means are you limited to that definition, but that is the definition that's in statute. And so we can talk a little bit about what that means to us. But I think more importantly, we want to talk about this idea of what is an attribute, what is an indicator, what is a metric, and then just make sure everyone here in the room today is on the same page on kind of what elevation we're trying to define attributes for. So as we start getting into the weeds or into the high elevation or wherever we want to be, that we're at least doing that in the same calibration. We wanted to start with an example. We're not saying this is a good example. The best example, it's an example, one that we thought at Oregon Consensus and OWEB and ODFW, the planning team thought was a good graphical, simplified example of what a resilient set of attributes could be. One of the really fun things is they use different terms. We're like, darn it, that's too bad. But this was defined for Lake Tahoe and the Central Sierras. They defined a number of what they called pillars of resilience. So in our lexicon, pillars is one kind of definition or is an attribute. If you see pillar, it's an attribute. We're going to go down a level to what Lake Tahoe calls elements. We're also thinking those are attributes. Then we'll get into what the Lake Tahoe example calls a metric. And Kristen, that's where we can argue back and forth on what a metric and indicator is. But as an example, you see water security, wetland integrity, biodiversity conservation, fire dynamics as pillars. So that's what the planning team, as they came together for this workshop, that's too high of an elevation to be particularly useful. Interesting. And really nice to see how the interconnectivity of all the different pillars work. Right, so there's that concept that this ecosystems are not disconnected from each other. People are not disconnected from ecosystems. All these things are connected. So this graphic was a nice simplified way to do it. Next slide. And for each pillar, the Lake Tahoe example, and sorry, sometimes the computer just takes a little bit to wake up. So if you wiggle the mouse, yeah. There you go. You're good. Perfect. Yeah. And so one of the pillars was forest resilience. And don't worry about reading this off the slide. I'll just talk to you about it. But on the left for forest resilience, the elements or kind of the next layer down, also what we were calling attributes. So structure, composition, disturbance. We're kind of three attributes of forest resilience. And then if you look off to the right, the Lake Tahoe example defined tree density, basal area, large tall tree density, clump gap structure as metrics. All right. So next slide. Just another example, biodiversity conservation as a high level attribute, kind of the different attribute elements of focal species, species diversity, community integrity. The metric suitable habitat for focal species, critical habitat for listed species, species diversity, non-native species distribution, functional group diversity, community diversity. So it's kind of 3 different layers of information. Next slide. Next one. So the planning group, and Sarah and Alexa, I'll let you jump in here too if you want, but defined an attribute as a broad characteristic or quality of land or water that contributes to climate resilience. Attributes help articulate the big picture goals for resilience. An indicator is a specific observable feature or condition that signals progress toward an attribute. It's a way to measure whether an attribute is improving or declining. So if we think of an attribute as habitat connectivity, you can have habitats are reconnected through removal of barriers such as fencing, installation of wildlife crossing or structure. Or if an attribute is flood resilience, an indicator might be the extent of floodplain restoration in priority watersheds. That any questions or kind of thoughts or reflections on that? Sit with it for a little bit. Metric is the actual numeric value or unit used to track an indicator over time. So metrics enable monitoring and comparison. They can be quantitative or qualitative. Often they're the numbers that get reported. So it's the number of fish passage barriers removed, or thinking of how, whatever the number or increase in extent of floodplain connectivity over time. So for this workshop, the team doesn't really want us to worry so much about defining metrics. Right? We don't want to get lost down in that level of weeds. That's really going to be for agencies and managers and others to define next. We really need your help defining attributes at enough level of detail they can be operational. So again, not just habitat connectivity, really thinking about connected aquatic and terrestrial habitat, and then even getting to the levels of indicators for each of the attributes to define. Alexa or Sarah, anything you want to add there? No? Steph, Sarah, Debbie? Okay. Mark, yeah, let's just open it up. And I want you all to feel like you've got a clear idea in your head, and I want you to share a little bit of that. So, people can say, oh yeah, I actually agree with what Mark says. We are on the same page. Or Kathy, if you look at what Mark is saying, you're like, oh, actually I thought we were, but we're off on this little thing, and let's talk about it. Go ahead, Mark. And remember to grab a mic if you can.
It's mostly a question based on our experience, my experience with veg management. Are you drawing a pretty sharp distinction between attribute and indicator? Because I think for us, I can see those going back and forth. As an example, a fire adapted landscape is going to be characterized by a certain species composition, basal area, stem density, heterogeneity, and things like that for east side forest. That could be an indicator of what that is. That could also be an attribute of what that kind of functionally healthy forest is. So I don't know that it matters, but I just wouldn't draw sharp distinctions between attributes and indicators.
I think that's a really great point. I think it's a little bit blurry between an attribute and an indicator. It's I keep looking at these paintings on the wall behind the commission dais over here. And the one on the right, for example, healthy, resilient landscape. But what about it? There's a patch mosaic of farmland and natural areas. There's mature sagebrush, there's recruiting sagebrush, there's, things like that. To me, that's going from a high level attribute down to some indicators. But if you start talking about like percent cover or miles of fencing, like you've gone too far down into metric zone. But I'm hoping we can play around with that space between attributes and indicators.
And Sarah, you mentioned like the percent cover. Like if I told you we want to have 20 to 30% cover of native grasses, that's too far in the weeds. But is saying, hey, percent cover is an important indicator of rangeland resilience? Where would you tell me that sits?
That's a great question. I would love to open that up.
Kirsten,
I'm not sure.
Can I pick on you to answer that one? So I can give you the example again. Okay. The example was because it tied into what you were pushing back on the example I gave earlier, which is if we're looking at percent cover of native grasses as a potential indicator of rangeland resilience, if that needs to be between 20 and 50% native cover, that's a metric, but is the percent native grass an important indicator of an attribute, which might be something. And Andy, I see you. I'll come to you next.
Yes.
Okay, Andy, I think you can give me more than that. So.
Well,
yeah. Okay.
yeah, I mean, I think it is okay. I would say, like, as a way maybe to push it up, maybe towards from that metric indicator attribute, it's like not a percentage of or a specific presence of a specific species, but like the attribute would be presence of native vegetation or yeah, right. So something along those lines would maybe get more to that. If you wanted to use like safe attribute space, like that might be a way to push it up. But I don't like, you said like presence of grass was important. I don't think that would be like, there's a practical element also, like we have to define attributes in a way that they are usable also, right? The implementability going, someone said that earlier. I thought that was good.
Perfect. So like this kind of playing with where things sit, I wouldn't worry about making sure you're clear on which bucket they sit in for now, but playing with it is exactly what I want you all to do. And you know, get there as deep on indicators as you feel comfortable. Like if the group is like, yeah, I'm feeling really strongly that dominance of native grasses and rangeland is a really important indicator. Like, let's get that, because then we've got that feedback and that level of consensus on it. If we don't, let's not worry about it and just say, hey, native grasses are an important component. Yeah.
Sorry, I just have a question. Under that attribute, it says a quality of land or water. And when we're thinking about this, I think you mentioned earlier just how innately connected community, people, animals are into this. So just for my own level setting, is it focused on land and water? Are those where the attributes lie? Or are we also thinking about people, since we're focusing on working lands as part of the EO?
Sarah, I'm looking at you. I can take a first run at that and then I can hand it to you, or do you want to take a first run? Yeah. So Dallas, I heard it's like everything is like the contribution or the condition of land or water, right? And I think as we were getting ready for this meeting, the quote that sticks in my mind is like, to the next 3 days is really for land and water to have their day. And so but recognizing those things are not separate. And in fact, social ecological systems are fully integrated. And if you look at how they adapt and change over time, since time immemorial, people have been part of ecosystems and managed ecosystems, and their footprint has shaped that. And we really want to know what the land and water would look like, knowing that interaction is there. Does that help? And then, okay.
Yes. Similar question, but extending to species.
Say more.
So, if we could be thinking about attributes as something like, it's not necessarily the characteristic of the land or water to support species, but that we have a rich species assemblage on the landscape. We have diverse species on the landscape.
I think both of those were in the themes, that those are two separate attributes, both important. Help me out here, team, in section 4. Yeah. Like we've got theme 3 as a diversity of habitat, species, and geophysical setting. So that's the idea that you're protecting and caring for and stewarding enough of all the things so that all the things can continue to thrive and you've got options. And if you look at the underlying conditions of social ecological systems, you need some of those base functions for any grouping of those things to continue to thrive. So I think both of those are in there. Does that help? Alexa, is that right?
Yeah, and I think maybe this is obvious or kind of not stated, but implicit. I am a visual thinker, and I really see the attributes kind of as cross-cutting characteristics, right? And the indicators are not necessarily one-to-one. There isn't like an attribute, an indicator, a metric, right? There's an attribute and then 4 or 5 indicators and then 10 or 12 metrics, right? And those indicators might kind of branch up to a multitude of attributes, right? If we have species diversity, that might speak to connectivity, or that might speak to, you know, terrestrial composition or something like that. So the indicators might kind of branch to a number of attributes. If that's, I don't know, that's how I see it, if that's helpful for others to think about it in that way.
I'm seeing others nod that way. So I think we're getting pretty close to like, let's roll up our sleeves and start doing this and smaller breakouts. Just a second, I see a couple hands. How you all want to organize this is the recommendation you should be making, right? We can let day 3 worry a little bit about human brains love lines. So the complexity may be complicated, but if you can figure out a way to operationalize it, more power to you. So Troy, and then I saw it was a Heather. Okay.
Thanks. And I don't know, this may be more of a gut check, or maybe you can provide some guidance in it. My comment harkens back to Sarah's initial comments that I really appreciated about incorporating the communities. And so zooming out before we even get here, you know, as I look at that ecoregion map, the Columbia Plateau is almost entirely privately owned. The Northern Basin and Range almost entirely federally owned. So I think about the context of how we're applying these in what needs to be resilient and what does it need to be resilient to, and how we reconcile the ownerships and the value sets here when the difference in how these lands are managed and who they're managed by, what control we do or don't have as state or federal land managers. Like, I think we're all going to be chewing on that quite a bit as we go into this. So I didn't know if there was any kind of introductory guidance or thoughts from anybody about how to reconcile some of that.
What would your preference be?
But what are my choices?
I'm just your facilitator, man. It's like, so it's really, I don't know exactly what the choices are, but I think we have 2 sessions. One is just to try and get the attributes laid out. And then the second piece is to try and dig down a layer deep. And so that dig down a layer deep might be how a particular attribute might play out differently on the Columbia Plateau than it does from the near shore. And that might be a place to start filtering and playing with different management regimes and how that might change attributes. But
well, yeah, I would just say then in that case, like for me, I'm really going to filter the attributes through the lens of the land use. Right? What an attribute would be given the anticipated land use.
I see a number of people potentially wanting to respond to that. Heather, are you okay holding for just a little bit? Liz, did you want to say something? And then Mark, did you want to say something?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just wanted to acknowledge, so I did a lot of the background research, and governance absolutely emerged as a theme of this work. Like, can you actually access the land to do the work that you want to do? I think we made an intentional decision to sort of not put it in the memo to focus it on the attributes of the lands and water themselves, but just wanted to highlight that governance aspect appeared in all of the literature that we looked at.
And Liz, it appeared even more so the higher in geography you went. So the more global frameworks tended to have that, the more kind of indigenous tribal frameworks tended to have that. The more local you got, a little less, yeah?
Yes, and as we looked at international examples too, right, different governance structures there where perhaps they're more trusting of their government and more willing to participate, private landowners participate in different ways.
Okay.
But yeah, there was some intentionality to sort of remove that aspect, but it's a huge part.
You have full permission to bring it back. Mark, and then Andy. And Andy, did you want to respond on this particular thread of conversation? Okay. Okay, cool.
I was just going to say for BMFP's experience, it was really important for us to get a pretty diverse and early on toxic group of individuals, interested people to consensus. And it was really important to ask what the landscape needs to be healthy and resilient. And then to bring the management implications in afterwards that are going to differ by various landowners or management agencies and so on. So it's really important, though, or critical to keep, I think, what you're asking about or thinking about out of the conversation for a little bit till we understood what the landscape need, and then we began to accommodate our respective interests in management approaches to that. And it's going to look different depending on different landowners and management stuff. But at least for us, it was important to separate those hard early on and then come back to it.
How's that feel, Troy?
Yeah.
Okay. Andy, were you going to say something similar?
You nailed it.
Okay, cool. Heather, thank you.
Not related to that. In the metric attribute indicator space, I would just request for people like me who don't work in Oregon and don't know all your data, that we could like have a gut check now and then on whether there just are metrics that are measurable for the things we're starting to focus on for attributes and indicators. Because I have been in other processes just like this where we got great agreement on indicators and then warfare over which metrics were they there? Could we actually have a metric for the attribute that paralyzed the agreement on indicators? So I just ask we use it as a, not let's talk about which metrics we're talking about, but yes, someone can say there's viable metrics for this indicator. Just reassure the process that we're going to be able to go to ground later.
Yeah, so Heather, quick question on that, because we were going to give folks kind of permission to willingly suspend disbelief for a little bit. And then quickly, right after lunch, kind of start going deeper on the indicators and some of that. And then a day and a half after that on kind of the practicality piece. But in your experience and what you've seen nationally or other places, is it better to have some of that just straight out of the gate?
No, I think it's fine. They'll let it go a bit. I think it can be shocking what there actually aren't data on, right? At like with sufficient coverage to apply consistently. And so I think we can get quite far in this suspended belief about an indicator that's been around for 50 years, that we're sure everyone agrees what it is, and we are sure there's data to perform on it, and there's not.
Yeah.
So that's all I'm, the timing you talked about sounds just fine.
Perfect. And then if there's some of those kinds of things, even if we're in the land of dreamland for a little bit, write it down on a Post-it. Just mark that so we don't lose it in the moment. Robin, I'm feeling like we're ready to go to breakouts here pretty soon. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Okay, thank you. Again, Nicole DiCrepio, with Marys River Watershed Council, but was with USGS for 23 years at the Climate Adaptation Science Center. And I just wanted to acknowledge, so we'd have a lot of these kinds of conversations, and so much of what we talk about actually in this space is around loss. And I just wanted to kind of bring that into the conversation. What I'm reading, what I'm hearing, I see a lot of words like collapse and catastrophe. And a lot of that is about and fear. I think Debbie said, this fear of what's going to happen if we have an awful fire season. We will have an awful fire season, and there's a fear element to that. And I just wanted to bring that in because we're talking about human values, and we're all trying to bring our ecologist selves to this, but we're still, ecosystems are not. There's one of them here that says ecosystems are at risk of loss. I've been an ecologist for many, many decades now, and I've never seen an ecosystem. I don't know what that means. I see ecosystems change and transform, and there's a different set of organisms and a different community there, but it's still a functioning ecosystem. A cheatgrass community is a functioning ecosystem. So it is very value-based, it's very human-oriented that we're talking about, as much as we're trying to bring our ecological, more science-based selves to that. And I know we're going to get there, but I just wanted to bring in that that loss and a little bit of that fear and the human element to it. I'm a nihilist, right?
Nicole, we can have some fun philosophy of science conversations, I think. Thank you for that. Okay. Of course.
This is Kirsten again. I really appreciate that framing And I'm also really grateful that Steve is here with the Klamath Tribes. I'm just harkening back onto, first foods for some communities. And, those of us who aren't indigenous to Oregon, like I am not, might be a majority in this room. We're just new here and have that humility that there are communities in Oregon that are tied to specific foods that are intrinsic to their culture. So I also have heard from other representatives of other nations say that, indigenous Oregon, now Oregonians have been responding to climate change since time immemorial, and dramatically sea level rise, subduction events, etc. So just really, really wanted to thank you for talking about Lost in a Way, because we do have so much love, obviously, in this room for so much of what we now know as Oregon. It's in part intellectual and it's in part emotional, but I think, Bobby, you're calling us to be mostly on the scientific, but I think there's that note where people mention humans and our role in it, and that will be an exciting conversation as well, because if we don't know something, we can't steward it very correctly. So thank you.
And also, just to be clear, I wasn't calling you to bring your science. I was calling you to bring your knowledge, right? So the difference is like, what are the attributes for the birds and bunnies and the grasses that can support the interconnection between people and ecosystems and those birds and bunnies and grasses too, right? All the different forms of knowledge have that. We have Troy and Steve online as well. And then I think that's another important thing is, as we're going through, is write down the questions that you have for the people who aren't here, and we can find ways to bring that in. Okay, next up, it's kind of time for you all to roll up your sleeves. I've been talking to you way too much. Time to bring everybody into conversation here. So we're gonna do some breakouts. Each of your tables, you'll see a map. Robin, if you wouldn't mind putting the slides back up and kind of forwarding to the questions that we're gonna ask. But what we want to do at this next stage, we're going to take about 45 minutes in small groups, and then we're going to come back and kind of do a gallery walk to see what you came up with. But we want to ask, like, did we actually get the draft set of attributes right? Like, if you had to pick 3 to 5 attributes that are either on that list in section 4 of the memo, or something you've already heard today, or something else that you're thinking of just now, we're using 3 to 5 as an arbitrary number. And it's based in kind of the empirical research that if you're looking at any social ecological system, there tend to be 3 dynamics or 3 variables that really drive any system. And so really pushing you to figure out what those are. There's a lot of social ecological systems in Oregon. So that's okay. If you need to pick more than 5, you can. But if you pick 100, you lose. So it's just the idea of trying to do that. We're going to do that individually, and you'll have Post-its at each of your breakouts. Those will be facilitated. I'm going to ask, if you're one of our breakout leaders, can you raise your hand, Liz and Robin and Kim? All right, and then Erin's going to be leading our folks online. And so they'll come and sit at a particular place, and you're going to ask these 3 questions. What's, making sure that the draft attributes are complete. Are there any indicators or priority attributes that you can define? And then what questions, I'm reading the wrong one. Can you fast forward it real quick? One more. There we go. So we're going to pick 3 to 5 attributes that are your top priorities, write those on a Post-it, place them on the map, and then notice which attributes were not on there. So if you picked your 3 to 5 favorites, is there anything key that you left off the list? And are there any priority attributes that are missing? In the end, you should have a whole bunch of Post-its on that map in front of you. And then you're going to present that map to the other groups. And we're going to see if we can come up with a draft set of attributes for Oregon in the next hour and a half.
Bobby, 1 attribute per Post-it.
Correct. Yeah. And ideally, knowing like my handwriting peaked in 3rd grade, put your name on the bottom in case we're like, I don't know what you're talking about, Sarah. And then maybe if you're a Sarah, you need to put your last 3 initials because there's like 4 Sarah R's too. And then we'll go from there. Does that sound good enough? Okay, if you notice on your name badge, you have a color. Oh, that's a fun surprise, huh? It's like a star. So Liz, you got green, yeah? Okay, so Liz, you're gonna stay there. The green group is gonna find Liz. Robin, what color do you have? Blue. Liz is in the back. Liz, raise your hand. Robin, you're gonna take the blue group. Don't leave yet, but you're gonna be in the sturgeon room. Is that the name of the fish or steelhead? I forget which fish. Yeah, so follow Robin out and around the outside. You have your breakout group out there. Kim, what color do you have? Yellow. Yellow is gonna come up here with Kim. And if you're online, we're gonna ask you these same 3 questions, and Aaron's got you, okay? And I'll make sure everyone is kind of on track. 45 minutes. Post it away, facilitators. Make sure that you please pick a reporter out and a note taker. So we want to make sure we're capturing all the notes. Okay. You shouldn't need a worksheet, but I'll walk around if you need extra paper. Yeah. Okay, blues out the back doors, around the way to the sturgeon room. Yellow up here.
Too much stuff.
All right, and Michelle, we can go ahead and take the audio off. We're gonna go ahead, and if you're online, we're gonna make sure you get into a breakout room. Curious what he came up with. I heard little peaks as I popped in and was eavesdropping. And it seemed like people had pretty different conversations, but each one productive in its own way. So I think it would be really useful to hear what you have to say. So let's plan on like a 3-minute report out per group with kind of questions. And so if you're listening to another group report out, be asking a couple of things. Did this group think of something fundamentally different than what you came up with? Is there something that was absolutely the same? We're trying to figure out, are there a set of attributes that were common amongst you all, or, is there a common set of attributes we can recommend? That's what we're listening for. And honestly, we're also running quite a bit ahead of schedule. And so after lunch, we have a lot of flexibility on where we want to take the conversation next. So particularly for Sarah R, Sarah O, Steph, Alexa, Debbie, be thinking about what you really need from this group to be able to kind of advance this to the next stage. So I'll hand it to you, Kim. And also for our folks online, I'm going to try and pull a microphone over towards you, which is going to be this one. So just give me 2 seconds. And just real quick, you want to ask how folks are hearing this online?
Can you all hear me all right online? Can I get a thumbs up or a reaction or a vocal? Nice. Thank you. So our group ended up, everyone brainstormed our top 3 to 5 attributes that we were interested in. And then we ended up making these really broad groups that were kind of encompassing of these higher level categories. And those included diversity, connectivity, capacity to adapt to changing conditions, stewardship, and then functioning ecosystems. So kind of riffing off of what was in the worksheet, the example, those 8 bullet points that were in there, but recognizing that a lot of those individual bullet points really do fall under this higher umbrella of something like diversity or capacity to adapt to changing conditions. We had some discussion about whether or not these categories are too big. but felt that this was a really good place for our group to land, since those indicators and metrics can then step down from those higher level connectivities. And these all really ended up being attributes that are applicable at the statewide scale. So not diving down into eco-regional specific needs or habitat specific needs or species specific needs, but rather these categories that really apply across the full state of Oregon. Some of the conversation that we had around adaptation in the worksheet, the handout specifically called out adaptation to natural disturbance. And we felt that that only captured part of the picture, because species need to be able to adapt not only to those short-term stressors, but also long-term change. So it's not just those stochastic events, those natural disturbance events, but it's long-term adaptation to warming temperatures, changing patterns of precipitation, phenological mismatch that we expect to see as the climate changes. We also had some conversation about the definition of intact, and some maybe discomfort about what does intact mean, and maybe having an attribute that's focused on intact high functioning ecosystems is asking for too much. So when we say intact, do we mean perfection? Do we mean return to historic conditions? And that's probably something that we're not going to be able to achieve. And so the group consensus there was just to remove that word intact from that consideration and just focus on functioning ecosystems. We noted that a lot of these categories are really closely interconnected. So if we talk about a high functioning ecosystem, is probably one that's going to have a lot of diversity, structural diversity, geomorphic diversity, soil diversity. That's also going to have a lot of connectivity. That is also therefore going to be able to allow for that adaptation to changing conditions. And so all of these pieces are obviously very closely intertwined. We had a discussion about what we saw was missing from this initial list in that worksheet, those 8 bullet points. And the one thing that we came up with was a sense of urgency. So presumably that will probably come in down the line when we start talking about indicators and metrics and maybe having some time-bound metrics in place. But we did feel that those attributes really missed that sense of urgency for this work to be done. And then the last piece that I'll touch on for our group here was the importance of working lands and the importance of stewardship. And just making a note that those bullet points in that handout, sort of bullet points 2 through 8, really can't happen without bullet point number 1. So if we don't have the people piece, if we don't have the stewardship piece, we really can't do any of that other work in terms of those attributes.
Awesome, thank you.
Awesome.
Questions for this group? Clarifications? What did you come up with that was similar?
All of it.
All of it. How, I guess, like 100% similar, 80% similar. Like, what do you guys come up with at the back? And I'm not modeling good behavior because I don't have a microphone, but if you don't think.
Yeah, I think largely a lot of the big themes that we talked about were really similar, both in terms of like scale, application across the state, even like what 3 attributes we maybe saw. We had a similar discussion, I think, around, you had it around intactness. We had it around just the term of functioning. Nicole kept saying, like, everything is functioning at some capacity, right? It just might not be the capacity you want it to be. So that was like, I think, a place where we spent some time. We didn't figure anything out, but we spent some time there being like, maybe some terminology might be important. In terms of like the scale of the, yeah. Sorry. Anyway, a lot.
Yeah, a lot. Aaron, how about online?
Yeah.
In terms of what we heard from this group, how similar is that? Similar? Okay. And then how about for Robin's group? Yeah.
Especially the last note, I think.
On what is intact or what was missing, or that you can't without stewardship, you can't. Centralness of item 1.
Yeah, centralness of item 1.
Yeah, it really just that item 1 kind of encompasses all the other ones. And so we kind of had the other ones nestled underneath number 1 because it applies across.
Okay. All right. Andy, let's go to your group now. You're already halfway there. Sorry to cut you off.
Well,
you just get going.
I know, it's exciting. I get it.
We went the state government route and appointed two reporters to report out here. So elevation for us, we really kept it statewide, broadly applicable and scalable. And one of the things there before we even got into attributes, we did a lot of zooming in and zooming out to kind of ground truth. Are the attributes that we're setting up at this high elevation, do they hold true when we get down to the scale at which we implement projects, you know, at the property scale or these smaller scales? And we felt like they do. We thought 5 and 6 could be lumped. We thought 3 and 7 could be lumped, similarly to what you're talking about, how it's really hard to separate some of these, and in some cases impossible. And so if you can't separate it, then necessarily you have to address, you know, multiple things at the same time. We thought maybe there's definitely a conversation about redundancy in these ecosystems. And so maybe that could potentially be a missing attribute depending on the scale at which you're looking at this at. And then ecoregion specificity, we did not have any attributes that were ecoregion specific.
That's all the stuff. I think, do you want to? Well, yeah, I think in terms of the way we kind of, I think, lumped some of these was under the bucket of complexity. So like some of that lumping that we did, instead of like intactness, functioning, soil function, hydrological, like it was just, they are complex systems that function at some level. And then I think the other conversation we had at the end was just how what the tribal perspective will be, what the perspective from tribes will be around just the concept of function, like what is function and what does that mean, and how that speaks to them. So, the 3 we did land on, just for the record, were diversity, connectivity, and then our new fancy complexity. So,
Can you talk a little bit more about how you would know complexity when you see it? Just because this could be one of those things like, oh, my life is super complex. My daughter may is like, no, it's not. So how would you know it?
Well, I think if you look at, I mean, I think this is where like some of that, like, what is it speaking to? We got at like, but I think we were sort of looking at it as something that spoke to at least the space and capacity for natural disturbance, high functioning ecosystems, and soil health, hydrologic function, and geomorphology sort of all coming into one. That all spoke to just the complexity of these systems as they work. So if you take those bullet points, you got complexity.
All right, cool. Thank you.
Can I add to that, Bobby? Just that.
Of course.
Also, then if you tear that down, right, to the landscape itself, the complexity across and within, and we kind of had it lumped in at first with like diversity and things, but then we talked about you could have a landscape that was diverse in its number of species, but isn't necessarily complex. You could also have one that's somewhat complex, maybe in its stratification vertically or horizontally, but maybe isn't necessarily diverse. And so that was kind of what led to that separation of that once you get to the on the ground scale and underground.
Nice. Anybody else from that group want to add anything? Can you grab a mic? Sorry.
Maybe you said this, Andy, but I just wanted to say that we also agreed on the last point that we thought 1 was kind of a setting point for how we should think about attributes. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Well done. Any kind of questions, reflections for this group, clarifications? Okay. Robin, what'd your group come up with?
I'm the designated reporter. So I'm really struck by how similar the other conversations were so far. We didn't split out by ecoregion or anything like that. We looked at larger, statewide kind of aspects. And we really struggled to eliminate any of the attributes or the sub attributes there. And so we took the approach of lumping under 2, 3, and 4. which really are about connectivity and room to adapt or to respond and have that type of resilience. With the concept, as I shared before, of that all nestled under number one, because it's really all about the people and the culture and the benefits that these lands provide for humans. So that's for the main perspective anyway. And so did spend some time talking about governance, and then had the decision that really governance is a little cart before the horse at this point. That's more operational, and so we'll get to it. It's super important, and really important that it not just be top down, but that it also be place-based or bottom up, so that you actually have buy-in from locals to actually implement it. And then also just some conversation about the way that it's been framed so far has been very reactive, and oh my God, this stuff is happening, we got to keep it from happening, as opposed to being proactive and looking forward in terms of what can we do. And that even comes down to the definition of resiliency that's in the executive order. It's very reactive, and so that was just something to keep in mind. So yeah, but really good conversation and very interesting.
Questions, clarifications? Mark, you grab a mic, go for it.
Could you say more about how you felt about the resilience definition in the piece of legislation?
Yeah, it's really actually Sarah probably could answer even better. Do you want to give it a shot, Sarah?
Well, full disclosure, I dislike the definition of resilience that's in statute. Because as Bill just said, it's really reactionary, and it's about like mitigating hazards, and it even says, what does it say that I don't like? Climate related threats. Minimizing damage, and yes, of course, but I would rather approach my work not from a reactionary place, but from a proactive place. If we're thinking about what strategies that we as agencies want to be moving forward, I want to be thinking proactively, thinking long-term, and getting ahead of things. So I think that was the way in which our group was really thinking about attributes and goals is proactive.
What does that make you think about, Mark?
No, I agree, and I have a problem with that.
Mark, you got the mic. It was a rhetorical question.
At least again for our work, which I appreciate doesn't maybe apply everywhere. It's really important to get clear what landscape and water resilience amounts to before we start to act based on that information. And so the human component, which is front and center, comes in after we begin to gain that kind of knowledge. And that particular definition isn't about that at all. I mean, it is what you said, reactive, but it's also about us controlling things. And it's very human-centered in terms of how do we better anticipate all these sorts of things, which is appropriate. But again, for me, it comes back to, well, that'll depend on what landscape resilience, water resilience amounts to. And if we try to jump ahead, we're not going to be going in the right direction. We really need to have the priority correct, methodologically speaking, to really make progress. So that's why I didn't care for it.
So I was part of that group discussion too. And I think just the one clarifying point, and I appreciate your comment. I was thinking more of number one, not necessarily as something that everything else was nested under, but number one as a sort of all like surrounding, 2, 3, and 4, more like, because there is a back and forth between communities in terms of decision making and governance and adaptive management, but then there's also, of course, impacts on the community side. So it's really more about number one, sort of being supportive of and being impacted by the choices that influence, that are part of connectivity and everything else that's in 2, 3, and
4. I just wanted to reflect on what Mark said. I really like that idea of not getting ahead of this, and it just struck me as like taking a stage 0 approach to resilience, and setting the stage for natural processes to occur. And I mean, doing it in a proactive way. I don't know what that looks like, but it's a little bit different than the way I was thinking about it.
Mike, can you explain what you mean by stage 0?
Sorry, I'm sure there's someone that can explain it much better than I can, but some of the traditional ways of stream restoration were like taking an engineered approach, like the Roskin approach, and we kind of said, this is the way we think it should look, and so we constructed it that way. And stage 0 is a different approach to stream restoration, where you just kind of clear the canvas and allow natural processes to shape what that stream restoration or what that restoration looks like over time. Someone else can probably correct what I just said, if that wasn't totally right.
Well, and I just remember Heather and I had a chance to carpool down here, and just the question of like, what would people be doing differently if you were managing towards these attributes? So kind of that question, if you had a different mindset and you got a different kind of understanding, what would you be doing differently? Well, we've got the last group, Erin. What did our online crew come up with?
So we had a really fruitful discussion, and we have up on the screen, and we're sharing their work board. We were more in the chat as an easier function. So our group reporter, I think Jessica, offered to do some of the high level share outs for what we came up with.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so you can see we didn't maybe use the whiteboard holistically as some of the other groups did, but I think you'll hear many of the same themes came up from what we heard from the other groups. The sticky note here on the right, the collaborate to ensure that our actions and management strategies support ecosystem diversity, connectivity, and redundancy, was the way we were thinking about the overall attributes. We did hear redundancy, I think, from some of the prior groups. And we had a bit of a discussion talking about how hydrology, soil health, and some of the geomorphology components may or may not fit within there. Some of the other themes of our discussion was, how do we think about incorporating people into this framework in terms of working lands, governance, and collaboration among agencies and many other landowner types. We had a lot of discussion about the scales of our resiliency actions, such as the challenges of mixed ownerships, and even just some of the maybe different functions among the natural resource agencies in Oregon. We had a bit of a discussion about recognizing the effects or impacts of compounded disturbances. So for example, many landscapes or whatever kind of spatial scale you're looking at are multi-disturbance landscapes. You might think about fire in addition to grazing, for example. And we talked quite a bit about this idea of data-driven management strategies and making sure that when we start thinking about indicators, that kind of next phase, ensuring that these truly are actionable and drawing that line between the indicators and our attributes too. So I'll just invite any of our other online working group members, if there's anything else you wanted to highlight that I failed to add, please speak up.
Thank you, Jessica.
Any questions or clarifications for kind of the online group? And then just to put Sarah and Alexa and Sarah and Debbie and Steph on notice, I'm going to come to you to help with the group kind of figure out what we want to do after lunch. But any questions for the online group at all? Once, twice, 3 times. So just in terms of writing down some of the common elements, we had 3 groups talk about diversity, 3 groups talk about connectivity, redundancy came up twice, complexity, stewardship, kind of the idea of space and capacity to adapt. So rather than just to natural disturbance, I heard like to adapt for short-term natural disturbances, but also long-term trends. Those are some of the high, kind of those high level themes that I heard a bunch. Like, how close are we of like, hey, if those are the kind of high level attributes that Oregon chooses to lean into, we're pretty good. I'm not going to hold you to any of this. I don't have any authority, but yeah, Heather.
I like them, but I wanted to ask the people who wrote the first draft, redundancy wasn't in there, and it's in a lot of frameworks. And I'm just curious if there was a reason why, if that like causes concern for some reason or isn't relevant for some reason, or just some response to that emerging from a few groups. Makes sense to me, but I'd be curious to hear the reaction of, you know, the people who drafted the first version and how that lands for you all.
Yeah, I honestly think that's just a gap in our first draft. So it makes perfect sense to me ecologically, and we're going to need it because disturbance events can wipe out a system. You need redundancy across the landscape. So no good reason why it's not in there. That's why you're here.
I think that during the communication piece of redundancy, I agree it's extremely important. But when we're communicating this plan out, the word redundancy may not have the same understanding of the general public. So I think it's a communication tweak of what word we actually use when we mean that.
Yeah, when I'm about to get fired, I'm a redundant employee, right? Yeah. Okay. Other kinds of thoughts? I'm going to think out loud here, and then I'm looking to Myrna. Is lunch ready to go? Okay. I'm kind of inclined to send you all. I'm going to give you two choices, and you can come up with a third or fourth. But I think choice one is to go back to the exact same group, and I'm looking for our facilitators too. Go to the exact same groups, and with those set of high-level attributes, start kind of digging in on indicators or sub-bullets. So kind of use those as a frame and start going a little deeper. That's one. The other could be is that we have a group focus on what does diversity mean? Another group on like what does redundancy mean? A third group on like what does connectivity mean? And just focus in on how that might be different if you're in Klamath, or different if you're on the shore, or different if you're in a riverine system, or different if you're in a forest ecosystem. Folks have a sense of how do we want to organize going deeper? So it feels like we're ready to go deeper.
How long do we have?
We're going to have an hour for sure. If you want 2 hours, you've got it. I mean, the bottom line is we're running about an hour and a half ahead of schedule. And I can get you out of here early too. I'm not going to promise that, because if you're productive and you're working and you made all of the effort to get here, I want to honor that.
Bobby, I feel like there might be a hybrid option there of let's have each group focus on one of those, but also give permission to indulge in a deeper dive, just so that we're not trying to do that across all the attributes.
Yeah.
But at least with the group that I spent most time with, for nerds, there is an incredible temptation to get to the specific. And I actually think it would be really helpful. We're not asking you to tell us what our metrics would be, but to tell us what might indicators and metrics and even activities look like under this attribute. Yeah, I knew that was kind of for you, Kathy. And allow folks to get as specific as they want and come back up, because I feel like we probably need a little more specificity in attributes than we have. But if we ask people to stay at the statewide level, they're kind of hamstrung in that.
Yep. And then if we did it that way, then my instincts would be to keep the groups the same. Alexa, looks like you might have wanted to say something.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking the second option where each group hones in on one kind of broad theme, but then I did hear kind of cross-cutting elements, right?
Mhm.
So stewardship, governance. If those themes could each maybe include those elements in their discussion.
Okay. Yeah, go
Sorry.
ahead.
And I know I'm not part of the organizing group, but I guess
Everyone
my
here has a
question
voice. Yeah.
would be, would there be value in the groups continuing down the paths that they're on already? Because they're not exactly the same. And I felt like our group may still had, we were talking like we were going to have more discussion along the lines we were on. But in the end, that provides the organizing group more information across the board.
Yeah. Part of what's going to give you freedom to do that is I'm going to keep the small groups the same. Part of trying to get more cohesion is to give you a different task, and you don't listen to me anyways, you being the rest of the group. So you can do whatever you want, right? So, but I think what we have is over lunch, we'll give you a new task. And the task will be something along the lines of, here are the overarching attributes that seem to be of interest. Take those deeper for identifying indicators and pick one of those you really want to go deeper on. And how you do that can let your group go where you need to. Does that sound like a good compromise? Okay.
Bobby, I just had a
Yeah.
couple of other thoughts, is that if we can be somewhat more inclusive with the list of attributes and not jump to just 3, because I did hear some variation across the groups in terms of what they felt were the top list.
Yep.
And I want to leave some flexibility for, as the agencies digest this, to land on the ones that resonate, best. So I guess, redundancy came up for some groups, but not for others. Space for natural disturbance came up for some, but I personally am not entirely crystal clear on what the set of 3 or 4 is that we're talking about yet. And then I guess I would just say, with regard to Sarah's suggestion that we ask people to dig down even further into sort of what sort of activities, I think that's good, because we do need a bit more specificity. I just would remind on a couple of sideboards, which is, maybe it's on day 3, but at some point there will be this conversation with the agencies around what's actually doable. What are we currently doing? What's measurable? What are we currently measuring? And also just within the constraint of existing resources, what's realistic to move forward. I want to avoid the situation where amazing ideas are loved on day 1, and then the poor agencies have to come in and say, yeah, we can't do that. Yeah, we can't do that. We can't do that one either. So just a little gut check there to help level set how people approach that discussion.
Yeah, Sarah, I think we're gonna have time for that at the end of today. I think we wanted to try and avoid the yeah buts too early. Like yeah, but all of these things make it impossible. But let's do that for the end of the day. And then maybe if I can, we'll let folks do lunch. And then if I can just tap on our facilitation team and organizing team just to get those lists of attributes up there, and we can be broad about it. I'm just thinking like a slide, and we'll do that. All right, Myrna, what instructions do you have for us for lunch? We have a full hour, so let's listen to Myrna, and then we'll go.
So it's right outside the door, the start of the table is a soup and salad bar with the shoe in. And so there should be a little bit of everything for everybody. So just step outside and you can just begin filling your plate.
And if you're vegan, gluten-free, is it labeled?
Yes, they're all labeled.
Perfect. Cool, Myrna, thank you. So we'll break 12:30. We'll come back at 1:30. We'll eat here. Find someone you don't know well or haven't had a chance to talk to have lunch with. And okay, welcome back, folks online. Can you hear us? Okay. We got some thumbs up. Okay, wow. I really like it when the Zoom emojis get extra enthusiastic. Like you couldn't see here, but there was like 100 thumbs up, but I think it was from 2 people. Okay, so want to check a couple things before we kind of go into this next session. But first, any really good conversations that happened over lunch? Any reflections that folks want to share? Fun things you learned about somebody that you didn't expect? Secrets? Yeah.
One of the folks I was talking to at lunch mentioned it would be helpful to know about kind of the other adaptation and resilience plans that are underway. I think particularly the plan for a resilient Oregon. So I am not prepared to speak to that right now, but I thought that was a really good observation.
I'm looking. Just Kirsten.
We'll look for somebody, and we've
Well-
got a couple days, but yeah, I might have to run that up to the governor's office.
Okay, that sounds good. But there are a number of different plans. The memo references a lot of those. And so, yeah, if we have time, that might be a good thing that we could queue up for tomorrow or something like that. Just an overview of how this group is seeing our intersection with all of those other things. Okay, other thoughts? Okay. Yeah, sorry.
We don't have to go too far down this rabbit hole, but one of the conversations that I was a part of at lunch was someone just observing that felt too easy this morning. And wondering if that was because we did people kind of fall into the list that was given to them? Or were we missing, would we have come up with a different list if we hadn't been given a boilerplate or something? Yeah, a stage 0, if you will, if we hadn't been given something to work with. And so I just wanted to, I think you asked the question of what's missing, what isn't on here that needs to be. But I'm just curious if others had that same observation and just a gut check.
Yeah, did we overbias you? Did we put too many sideboards up?
I tended to ignore them. So.
Like I said, most people ignore me. Yeah. The redundancy is new? Yep. Okay. Those are good questions to ask. I think the other thing we were asking ourselves as facilitators is what language might be different if we had different people in the room. And what language might be different if we were trying to communicate to different audiences. So all those kinds of things that you should always be asking of yourselves, but don't let it cripple you. All right, so we can think about how we frame about this, how we talk about it, but I think a couple of times it's come up as like, first you listen to the land and the water and figure out what it's trying to tell you. Then you act from there. So we're still kind of in that space, is trying to listen to the land and water and figure out what it's telling us. Bill.
Yeah, I just wanted to get to what Sarah talked about. It struck me as being really easy too, but it's because we haven't said no to anything yet. That's a big piece of it. We said, oh yeah, these are all great. And we'll reorganize them and nest them, but we haven't said, no, we're not doing this. That's going to be the hard discussion.
But I think that's a good cue for kind of this next step. Hold on, let me get rid of my floating bar there at the bottom so you can see it. But just real quick, this is should be thank you, Aaron. This should be a reflection of what each of the small groups told us right before lunch. So as we were listening and taking notes on which attributes were most important to the different groups, these were the kind of the 5 high-level attributes that we were hearing. So the idea of stewardship, human well-being, governance, and forgive the graphic, we did it in 5 minutes, but that would be at the center. Kind of, it's a set of attributes that are connected to all the other attributes, and it's somehow meant to capture that relationship between kind of people and ecosystems, that they're integrally connected. Diversity, so that's diversity of habitat, species. Another group said we could lump one of the other attributes under diversity, so geophysical setting, climate buffering, microclimate. Connectivity came up as important, landscapes and watersheds. Capacity to adapt to changing conditions. So that wasn't just to natural disturbance and near-term stochastic events. That was to kind of long-term changes that were occurring. It was to give ecosystems the space where they could adapt. also looking at complexity. I don't know if I got this exactly right, but I was hearing that under that term complexity, that's where functional ecosystems sit, soil health, hydrologic function, geomorphic stability kind of sit, and then we added redundancy. Just curious, did we hear you right? Can you reach that mic? No, here, you can have mine. Take mine. No, don't do that. You're gonna, some water is gonna go somewhere. Okay.
Sorry, hopefully this is deep. I have a question for the group about redundancy being its own. Within each one of these, doesn't that create redundancy? So is it redundant to have redundancy as one of the attributes?
And we can get some feedback on that now. We don't need to decide that one way or another, but we can send that question to the subgroups to make a decision too. But any initial kind of reactions to, is redundancy its own thing or lumped under other things? I think one of the things we want to be careful of is not to overly lump things, because then we're going to lose things.
I have most commonly seen it with diversity. And explicitly to be like, you can have one of every species and you have diversity, but there's no redundancy in the system to persist through an impact. So it is, in my experience, most commonly paired with diversity. And that could be of structure, of biophysical features, of species, of whatever. But I don't know if others have other practice with that, but that's where I'm most used to it being lumped in a resilience framework.
Just to take that and then also address the comment before lunch about maybe we shouldn't use the term redundancy. It's like a definition of that richness,
Multiple of the same species.
what term am I thinking of? There's an ecological term.
We confuse those two so many times.
Yeah, richness doesn't. Richness is, from a biological perspective, is the count of species. So biological richness is one of the aspects of biodiversity. So it's the number of species that you have is the most common interpretation of richness.
Anyway, well, never mind.
Okay.
But I was thinking about maybe abundance is a better term than redundancy if we want to go down that route.
Well, we're starting to get to the level of kind of indicators and metrics under that. Like if you care about diversity, if we follow kind of what Heather just said, redundancy might be a sub-attribute or an indicator underneath that. And then a metric of redundancy might be structure, richness, abundance, what have you, if I got that right. But yeah, so I don't want to get too deep into this one, because I think this one is where you all as subgroups can get to. But I know this group, as you all started, is like that 80% at the high level is really easy to get to. And once you start digging into the level we're touching on, that's where the hard work starts.
I was just going to share, unless this is about redundancy. Okay.
Maybe we don't want to talk about redundancy. I was just going to say, I see a role for redundancy in some of these other categories, like connectivity, for example. If we start talking about something like habitat linkages or corridors, we need redundancy there so that if something happens to one of them, there's additional routes for species to be able to move.
This is an online comment from John Fisher, Pew Charitable Trust. He said, capacity to adapt seems like it's partially a product of diversity, connectivity, and maybe complexity. And then John, you're welcome to add in anything else.
Yeah, I guess I know that a lot of these are related to other ones, but capacity to adapt is the one that I think is the least clearly defined. Like if there is diverse genes, ability to move, functional whatever scapes, like then you get capacity to adapt, but I don't see it as its own clear thing as the other ones are. So that one is the one that seems to me the most fuzzy.
Yeah, thanks for that, John. And I think going back to something Alexa said at the earlier part of the meeting, is as we get down to indicators, they might be pointing to multiple things. There might be different connections. And so we don't have to keep things in one single bucket. If if this does become a little more interconnected, that's okay. But go ahead, Mike, and then I'm going to check one more thing.
Yeah, I think just when it comes to redundancy, it'd be worthwhile to make sure that we're all operating under the same definition of what that is, because I'm hearing a few different things, and where my mind naturally goes is conservation biology when you talk about resiliency, redundancy, representation. But then with this, what I'm thinking about in terms of redundancy is more along the lines of like, you know, setting that stage for the unknown future. And it's like, in terms of being resilient, there may be several paths that are redundant in concept, but not in structure and function, that get us to the same point in terms of resilience. So maybe that's what redundancy is, and which is yet perhaps another definition. I don't know.
Yeah. So based on this, I'm inclined to leave it where it is for the moment, knowing that maybe you will decide to lump it in where it is or it needs to go, but keeping it where it is so that you have the conversation on how you would know redundancy when you saw it. What would be the indicators of that? Might be an okay thing. Okay. Let me advance the slide. One more thing we put together. I don't know if the word principles or thoughts to keep in mind, but these were some other bullet points that you all raised as small groups. Kind of the idea of a big part of what we're after is listening and understanding what the land and water need before acting upon it. That it's like a lot, and this came up in the conversation around what the definition of resilience is. It's not about trying to control nature; it's about setting the stage for natural processes to operate. And then kind of looking forward, being proactive, not just reacting, be data-driven, knowledge-driven, collaborative, and place-based, which also has this kind of idea of there are power imbalances and differences to recognize. There's mixed ownership, connecting agency actions, consider action where it's potentially not possible. So there may be some streams that are not going to be viable salmon habitat in the future. There may be really tricky trade-offs around kind of how you manage farmland for producing different crops or water quality, how you go about that. So one of the other things that was mentioned is it's all cool to have principles or things to keep in mind, but if you're not measuring it and incorporating it into something specific and manageable, it's like, that's cute, I forgot what those were. So at any rate, if they're really important to you, make them an attribute or find some way in your overall framework to make them operational and real. Those are some of the other things we saw. Yeah, go ahead, Kirsten.
Forgive me, are you through your list? Am I interrupting? Did you go all the way through that?
That's it.
Could I caution us? I'd be curious what other folks would think about the term trade-offs. I was counseled in my career to use like choice instead, or intention, multiple benefits of any given decision. The minute we start talking about trade-offs, someone's back is going up.
Yeah.
So maybe just a frame here, which is like, you remember this, Robin, this Bob Wise. This is, where do you invest? Where are we choosing? We don't have to say what we're not doing, but in terms of proactive and positive, I would just caution against that term.
Yeah, I think it's totally possible, as long as we all recognize that this is getting about, there are going to be some hard choices to make, yes, and you can't have everything all the time for everyone.
Of course, choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that works. All right. So if I go backwards, folks feel like kind of the assignment for the next step would be going into breakouts, confirming like, hey, these are the attributes we want to continue going with, and send you to start defining some indicators and more specificity under each one of those attributes.
Bobby, you want each group to choose 2 though, is that right? We're not asking them to do that with all of the attributes?
Correct, that was gonna be part B of my question.
Well, we have worked together alone. Sorry about that.
You're all good. So yes, as Sarah said, the idea would be that we wouldn't ask every group necessarily to get to all six of these buckets, But if you pick 2 to really focus on, and if you were energetic, you could get to all 6. But so for example, if you're Kim's group, do any 2 of these really speak to you all that you want to go after more?
This table?
Yep.
Yeah, capacity and complexity. I'll speak for them all.
Right. So it's, and again, if we said, let's listen to what Mark says and give you guys capacity and complexity, that doesn't mean you can't talk about all of the others too. I just want you to start with capacity and complexity so that I can start Aaron's group on Aaron, what do you think your group would resonate with? I'll come back to you. But for Liz's group at the back, which of these sing to you?
Diversity had the most post-its.
Okay.
Connectivity? I would say if there's one that could use some more work, it might be connectivity.
Okay.
Diversity and connectivity.
All right, this is shaping up. Diversity and connectivity, hypothetically, maybe. Robin, where's Robin? What are your group thinking? Mike, which ones fit more with the conversation your group wanted to continue?
Well, I think diversity, connectivity, and capacity were the 3 that kind of.
Okay, can I for sure give you capacity?
Sure.
You all said stewardship and the human stuff was important to everything, and no one's picked it yet. Can I give you capacity to adapt in the stewardship, human well-being one? Okay. And then Aaron, that gives you anyone you want for your group. Yeah. Does your group want to just decide and then I'll come back and tell you, or?
Yeah, why don't we do that?
Yeah? Yeah. Okay. All right. So your instruction is I'm trying to figure out how to get you this. If the facilitators can take a picture of this slide, we'll also try and push it out to you via email on a Google slide. I'm just trying to figure out what the most efficient way to make sure, Rob in particular, your group has it. Okay. And we'll leave this up for the folks in the room. And then Aaron, do you have what you need on it? Because you'll be able to access Google. Okay. The assignment over the next, let's say, 45 minutes is to see if you can find indicators, certainly for your two buckets, and then keep going as far as you want. And if you're finding actually we need more buckets, that's fine for now.
And Bobby, our
Mhm.
indicators need to be things that we have data for. How do you want us to consider that earlier comment here?
And so Robin, I'm gonna think out loud with you here, because we were talking about that a little bit at break, is like you guys have been thirsty for putting the practical layer in all day. So I think go ahead, just go for it in terms of indicators. For agencies, you're not gonna have all the agencies in every room. So you're gonna have incomplete data. But let's say for your table, if something is coming on around water quantity or quality, you've got the expertise that you need on what data is out there, go ahead and let the group know that. Same thing for health and well-being. If there's something that OHA has there, great, bring it. But we're gonna spend some time as a whole group at the end adding that layer.
And don't leave something off because you suspect there might be insufficient data, right? Like don't preclude it now.
Yeah. Thank you for
That's
saying
helpful.
that, sir,
Thank
because I do think as a long-term endeavor, it's probably worth it to the agencies to hear from this group on where you might identify metrics and even where some of you might be measuring progress on some of these things that even though you might not have the ability to market now, it doesn't mean that you wouldn't be able to in the future. So I'm testing that with the agencies, but I think that's right. Okay.
Sarah Rs, anything you want to add in terms of guidelines for starting to introduce practicality back into the conversation?
I think I already did.
Yeah, okay, all right.
I stand by that, but you want to leave it more productive and open for now.
Yeah, I guess what I would maybe ripping off Sarah's comment from earlier, like I think the intent would be if you're going to get into attributes or to metrics and actions or even data now, do that to ground truth your attributes work and develop some complexity and specificity there, not to tell the agencies what we should be doing at that level of detail, right? So like, don't try to develop a comprehensive list of those things, but use it. And I saw I'm looking at my group because they were doing this a lot earlier. Like I have this really specific example. It helps us see what's going on at the attributes level. But we're not going to try to build comprehensive recommendations of that.
Yeah.
Is that better, Sarah?
Yeah, I think that's good. And I mean, maybe it's like, just know that some of those might be really amazing metrics, but just have that awareness that agencies may or may not be measuring, tracking that right now.
Yeah, and our prime,
Or in the near future.
there you go. And our primary audience is the agencies. And there's lots of other land and water managers in Oregon too. So they might be able to access things that agencies can't.
I just want to build on that in that, like, I think it's an acceptable outcome as we are entering this new space that we're all trying to work in. There may not be, like, part of this exercise might be that we have to develop measurement, like protocols, right? So we have to come up with the way to measure these things, like, and that could be I feel like that's an okay outcome of some of these exercises, is that maybe we don't have that data. Maybe it's because we don't even know how to measure that yet, or we don't have a protocol in place that's accepted, but that's an important enough metric or indicator to look at, that part of the exercise long-term would be, we need to develop systems and protocols to measure these things.
Exactly. Perfect. Yeah, Kristen.
Lovely. So it seems like we're going possibly into geographies. So I just wanted to check that. So like an indicator to support the attribute in the on the coast in a marine environment is going to be really different than an indicator to support an attribute in the east side of the state. So okay, Sarah's saying it's okay.
Apparently I decide what's okay now. All of a sudden. I think it's normal and natural, Kirsten. I think it'll be really hard to get to a greater level of specificity than this without doing that. And I think this planning team, as we get back together after the workshop or even in the next few days, and try to sort of synthesize and deal with the results, we know that. And so if you're clear that you're doing that and when, where, and how, again, I think to test and develop specificity around attributes and indicators, it makes a ton of sense. And I think most of us have one or more ecoregions or systems that we're familiar with, and we can test this stuff out. And if we can just be clear about that and not assume that it applies across the line, you appeared. Do you have something more to say? No? Okay. I think that's fine, but let's just be transparent with what we're doing.
No, that's good. And so it's just really for testing, but it's not definitive. So I just wonder, in the work of the agencies trying to develop strategies around 25, 26, that there will be a different time to be spatially applied, and that is not necessarily right now, except for the work of developing the attributes.
I think so, and it'll be iterative, right? Like, I think there may be a limit to how specific we can get at the statewide level, and we want to find that limit, and then we'll start drilling down as much as we need to from there.
And Sarah, it's probably, Debbie, it's fair to say this group does not need to worry about making decisions. This group is making recommendations.
Draft a memo to the governor's office on day 3, then we can just edit that and send it on. But our goal is this is the fun end of the funnel, I forget who used to say that, but like, we need all the ideas. We can keep synthesizing them, but we want to like chew this stuff over until it's as clear and as rich as it can possibly be. If you break some of Bobby's rules in the process, that's okay. We'll fix it later.
That's right. So if you can be place bound, awesome. The other one that came up was time bound. So in terms of urgency, so go ahead and think about time bounds on this too. All right, I think we're ready.
Bobby, one more thing. So there are, I think, 25 sub things. Are you happy with the idea of 25 of something, or are we setting priorities and talking about indicators?
So I get it. The
if you look
like
at things that are in the
The things in the parentheses was me trying to be cautious not to lose anything that was in the broad, like the high level themes. So you all said connectivity, but the words in the memo said connectivity of landscapes and watersheds. So I didn't want to lose landscapes and watersheds, so I put those down there. So I think you all can take that however you will. You can, but go back to the memo. Similarly, like diversity, it was diversity of habitat, species, and geophysical setting. And one group said we could lump in the climate buffering and microclimate attribute up into diversity. So that's what I did there. So yeah, again, we don't want 100 attributes on this, but how they're articulated could probably still work.
One way to look at it is that we have maybe 4 attributes already. We've got one related to diversity, one related to connectivity, et cetera. So if, like, mission accomplished, if I may. So then what we're going to do now is you all are going to take it a step further and offer up indicators that could potentially be useful. I think it's better to be inclusive of those for the moment so that the agencies can then see themselves somewhere. And will all of those indicators move forward? Maybe not, but you've offered up quite a bit for the executive agencies to work from. Does that make sense?
And then just as a reminder, is don't be constrained by the memo, but it is pointing to some ideas around the connectivity, like across roads, access to refugia, so those kinds of things are in there too. All right, let's go ahead and break into small groups. So exactly where you were before. So Kim's group here, Liz's group here, Robin's group over in the fish room. And then, yeah, remind me to introduce our guests when we come back. Yeah, because I just lost everyone's attention anyway. So we'll get you, but stay right where you are. Okay, thanks. Facilitators 245. Was asking if near shore equals like the full was it 3 miles, what's it? Territorial sea. Thank you. Yes, let's call it yes.
Let's call it yes.
Because there's no other place. So for today's purposes, let's call it yes. Yeah. All right, how'd that go for people? It seemed like we gave you a challenging task. It seemed like folks were kind of identifying things at a lot of different elevations, a lot of different kind of ways things were connecting to each other. How'd that go generally for people? Okay. All right. Well, part of this is let's see. And so Sarah O'Brien and Debbie Colbert, your job is to understand this enough to synthesize it and help kind of share what we learned with tribal partners tomorrow. So our mission is we're reporting out.
I hadn't told Debbie that yet, by the way.
Yeah, Debbie's got this. She knows now. Thanks, Debbie. Is making sure we're giving enough information for them to be able to do that well and to take pressure off of everybody. We asked you to throw as much spaghetti on the wall as possible. And so that's going to be on Alexa and Sarah, myself, others to try and synthesize that in a way that we can bring back tomorrow. Okay. So we'll go around, we'll present that. I want you to be asking questions of each other. In particular, think about like how easy it was to say the word diversity and connectivity and complexity. And I was like, oh yeah, that was great. And then like how hard it was to define stuff underneath that. And does that inform any different way we want to be thinking about attributes? So that's task one. And then we'll come back together again after we do that and say, okay, what questions do we have that are remaining? What questions do we have for tribes? What questions do we have for the agencies and we have a working lunch tomorrow to kind of roll up our sleeves and get into this again. What do we want to focus that time on? Does that sound okay to spend the rest of our time here together on? Okay, so I've asked Robin's group to go first. So come on up here to the front, grab the mic from me, Ryan, and take it away.
Thank you. Oh, that's pretty short. Okay, we had a great time. We had a lively conversation, and we threw a lot of spaghetti on the wall for our two attributes. So we started off talking. We first tried to tackle what had been capacity to adapt to changing conditions. That was the slow start, and then we finally started. We reframed this one yet again to focus not on adapting to, but responding to. And then we took it back. We were struggling with the changing conditions just being so broad. So we refocused back to more of the original intent around disturbances and natural disturbances. So capacity to respond to natural disturbances. Our conversation went in a number of different directions. Again, I think we have a lot of sort of 50% indicators here, but made good progress. We first started talking about just general persistence of habitat forming processes and the time for habitats to recover following disturbances as one potential indicator. We then took something of a more watery approach, thinking about reconnected floodplains or floodplain connectivity in lateral, vertical, and longitudinal directions, connectivity of floodplains to water. And I don't know that we went fully down the aquatic and floodplain route, but there's definitely important indicators in that space. We then turned to more terrestrial fuels and fire and discussed indicators related around, managing fuel loads, the extent and severity of natural disturbances as compared to a natural range of variability or a desired range of variability, community proximity to fuels, positive trends in terms of the treatment of fuels for vulnerable populations and conditions, prescribed fire. And again, so obviously very important indicators around fuels, fire, impacts on ecosystems, impacts on communities, and recognizing not just that fire as a disturbance can do harmful things, but it's also an essential and critical part of our ecosystems in Oregon. I forgot back on the floodplains and aquatic side, we also had an indicator about decreasing barriers to sediment transport as one of those critical processes that we want to conserve and improve. And then we turned to some more general conversations about both being able to capture general ecosystem conditions as an indicator of being ready to experience disturbances and to respond to disturbances. And we talked about also land use management corresponding to fire and flood variability, identifying where some of the resources, thinking about scarcity of resources, and that not all the things we care about are equal in terms of scarcity, and that we may be needing to put attention towards those more scarce assets and resources. And then also thinking about the human capacities to defend. Human capacities defined and being able to adapt over time. Oof. There's a lot there on this one. Great conversation. Did I miss anything?
I think that we also got the oval, stewardship, human well-being, and governance. And in the morning session, we had conceived of this as an envelope around some of the other things because informed and thank you, yes, please. So I'll just say the segue here, human capacities adaptive over time. It was important to recognize that within capacity to adapt to changing conditions, there's a human component here. And then we turn over here to the stewardship, human well-being, and governance on its own, but recognizing that there's a lot of interconnection across between the oval and all of the rectangles there. So this conversation was lively, and so I'll go through where we landed here with an emphasis on understanding the working lands and waters, support ecosystems, the economy, and lifeways. So capturing kind of all of those different dimensions, and recognizing that we can't just speak when we get to the metrics conversation. That's going to be really important, because the tendency will be to focus on metrics, things that we can measure, which might fall disproportionately in some of these categories. But we want to make sure that all of those are represented in the indicator. This is really struggling here. Sticky doesn't want to stick. Okay, so working lands as they contribute to ecosystems, economy, and lifeways. And then there's an important stewardship or governance component that we spent quite a bit of time talking about here. And we characterize it ultimately, and language is going to be important here, we recognize, but a shared accountability and co-stewardship development and collaborative governance across organizations. Another way that we were thinking about this is a diversity of social capital connecting to the governance and the accountability in decisions around these things. And ultimately leading to more success stories in collaborative and collaboration towards shared goals. So when we get down to like the essence of what we're talking about, that was what was important there. There's another dimension of this, and that is people are in place-based relationships with lands and water. So there's an individual component of this here, recognizing that when we speak of people, that's important to, it's important to reflect the diversity of people. There's an or a multi-generational component of this that we came up earlier in our conversations. We want to make sure is captured in the indicator. There was some discussion here, which will connect into the conversations tomorrow, but respect for tribal sovereignty in the indicator. And a part of that is recognition of the abundance and access of first foods and cultural resources in the stewardship dimensions here. And we have just the individual relationship with place-based in place-based relationship with land, but then there's the community engagement component of this, how people are together in engagement and in relationship with the land. So opportunities for connection and governance that's engaging the community and more broadly, not just the units of government or the units of organization that we often think about there. And that means, let's see here. Adaptation decision, I think I got that there. And then the final thing is a recognition that governance decisions, stewardship actions are responsive to changing conditions and ensure that the ecosystem is, there's some recognition that the ecosystem is meeting the needs of the people who are engaged in this and responding appropriately to changing conditions and scarcities. Did I get it all? Anything to add from my group? Okay.
Kind of questions, clarifications for this group? Overlaps with what you heard? Not really.
I think I forgot to say in our discussion about adapting or responding to disturbances, we talked about fire, we talked about flooding. We know we did not cover all of the important and critical disturbances that we're facing in our state. So that was just a recognition. We made it thus far. We have further to go. Yeah.
The drought,
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there a marker? Somebody have a marker handy? Here, wait, let's just start right there. All right, Erin, your group wanna present?
So we had the online group. So Jessica, if you'd like to share out again, I'm going to share our wonderful digital sticky note board, which might be difficult. You can see we had a lot of thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. So let me see if I can try and distill some of the main themes or talking points. I think to start, we talked quite a bit about complexity was the idea that we wanted to start with for that particular attribute. We spent quite a bit of time there, I think, because we felt that complexity was maybe the one that was most challenging or less well developed. And once we kind of got into that discussion a bit more, it felt almost like it was a bit of a hodgepodge of attributes or metrics that kind of just got stuck there. So we spent some of our conversation thinking about how does soil health, hydrologic function, and geologic or geomorphic stability kind of fit together under complexity. And we ended up thinking that perhaps functionality or some sort of verbiage related to ecosystem functioning might fit better here. A couple other themes I'll just highlight is building in uncertainty. I think I heard some other folks kind of talking about governance. So we pulled out some questions about how would we build uncertainty? What is the process for decision making and sort of the timeline that this effort will be working against? And maybe circling back to that idea of ecosystem functioning or measuring it, we did also acknowledge that there's a lot of maybe complexity or vagueness in how we might measure some metrics associated with ecosystem health or functionality, for example, both in terms of the data being measured and also what would be an appropriate baseline. And that covers at least some of what we have summarized up here.
Thank you, Jessica.
Any questions?
Anyone else wanted to add anything? You did a great job summarizing, so we're good.
Well, Jessica, I had a question, sorry. When you guys talked about baseline, that is something we're all going to need to be thinking about a little bit, is measuring change from what? Did you talk about how you would measure or how you would set a baseline to understand changes in functionality or changes in uncertainty?
I would say a little bit. I think we just kind of touched on what are going to be some of the challenges associated with that from, what is the natural system, for example, and what are we measuring against, maybe particularly from the aspect of a part of the landscape that is currently working lands. What would be baseline for those, for example?
Okay, great. Now we can clap. Thank you. So you're saying you want to go next? Okay. Is that you, Pete?
Yeah.
Let me get you. You can use whichever mic you'd like.
On my computer, I'll go here. Yeah, great. Our group was tasked with the capacity to adapt and complexity. We started off by crafting. We thought that would be helpful for us to craft or translate that into more of a sentence with a verb or an action word in it to describe what we're talking about. So on the first attribute, capacity to adapt, we landed on lands and waters have the capacity to adapt to changing conditions, including both short-term shocks, i.e. disturbances, and long-term stressors. I think the language environmental stressors was what was in the memo. Or no, excuse me, environmental shifts, something like that, broader environmental shifts. And then we moved on to defining essentially some indicators, starting recognizing that sort of we have a lot of different systems across the state of Oregon, but we tried to come up with indicators that we thought would be broadly generalizable, applicable across systems. I, being a forest guy, immediately went to forest things, and then people reminded me there's water in the state, and so added some aquatic. But on the terrestrial side of things, forest side of things, and rangeland side of things, we landed on 4 essentially: species composition, vegetation structure, the pattern and spatial arrangement, getting at heterogeneity at multiple scales in the system, and then disturbance processes, meaning landscapes that can support, withstand, and recover from disturbances like fire, drought, insects, etc. There was I have a note here, there was a desire to frame disturbance, or be sure we frame disturbance beyond or out, beyond just catastrophic terms because of the importance it plays in these systems. On the aquatic side, there's parallels: species composition, structural diversity across the drainage, and again, disturbance processes like access to floodplains. Somebody made the question, or made the comment, that they were these are still half baked. I was laughing in my head, saying maybe we didn't even make it to the oven on them with with the cookies. But and then on complexity, we decided that a lot of what was contained here felt like it can be nested in other attributes, and there was a uncertainty about the geomorphic stability concept, that maybe feeling like it either needs additional clarification or just shouldn't be carried over at all, because these are dynamic systems and maybe not really appropriate to label it geomorphic stability. We have a geomorphologist in our group, so that was important. And I think I'll stop there. Anything else, group?
Was that all just capacity to adapt, or was that complexity too?
Yeah, ultimately we sort of advocated on complexity, just saying that it was probably best folded into other attributes,
okay,
and not as a standalone.
Questions for the yellow group?
Can I add one? No, I'm not sure if I can. The one piece I had a little heartburn over was soil health, but then as I thought about it, healthy soil has structure, and it has diversity in the invertebrates that are within the soil, and other characteristics or other species groups. So, I mean, I felt like our group was pretty above ground oriented. Maybe that's not fair to say for the water side of things. But I guess I would just hope that we don't lose the soil piece in our thinking, because some of it translates perfectly. And I think it's especially important as you think about agricultural working lands.
Well, and I'm wondering for you as a group, where, Pete, help me if I get these wrong, but it was species diversity, there was structure, and then kind of how the system responded to disturbance or readiness. I forget exactly whatever framing y'all used.
Yeah, and the fourth one, I don't know if this is working for me to lead, but the fourth one was the pattern and spatial arrangement on the landscape.
There you go. So if you applied that to rangeland, if you applied it to forest, if you applied it to soil under the ground, like how would you go about understanding that in every system, or to a river? Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you. Any questions clarifying for this crew? Okay. How's the green group ready? Oh, yeah, go for it.
I was slow to raise my hand. Can you guys say why you put species composition here and not in a hypothetical diversity bucket that you didn't get to work on? Were you seeing it as connected, or is explicitly you're talking about species composition for responding to shocks and stressors? Can you just say it a little more?
Yeah, we were trying to specifically think about the species composition from the lens of the capacity to absorb, respond, adapt. So the idea that if you are looking at kind of a forested area, help me, Mark, and having kind of, different kind of diversity of trees, that lends itself to the capacity to absorb fire on a landscape. which is a different lens than the diversity lens, I think, in terms of what resiliency is being provided by
I think I'm thinking about it, well, yeah, because I think of speech and diversity being there in a resilience framework to be about the capacity of the system to respond. So I'm just going to keep simmering on that and like, so maybe this is pointing at both attributes or the attribute of diversity you actually just captured here under this one. How do you think about, yeah.
Capacity, activity, you address the diversity, no, it's too late.
Okay. Okay.
I know, pick up your damn money.
I get it.
But I think some of these, I was hearing that in a lot of groups, that as folks were talking about indicators, they were pointing to complexity, they were pointing to connectivity. So there's a little bit of a mismatch that's going to need to get untangled again when it gets back into a logic framework, and how would ODFW actually operationalize how it uses some of these things too. All right, Alice.
Okay, there's a few, we had great conversation. And I think that we kind of like circled the train a little bit on the indicator talk, thinking kind of like, how are we defining indicators? We decided that we wanted indicators to be applicable statewide again, and then metrics is when we would really drill down to the ecoregion state. So that's how we thought about it. It was brought up again at the end of the conversation that once we got to the indicator part, it seemed too easy because we still kind of all intrinsically know what indicators are. We think that the difficult part is going to be, how are we, not me, I'm not a state agency folks, how are state agencies going to be able to take this and change what they're already doing as they manage for these indicators now and parallel play together, as Sarah O'Brien mentioned, but really change kind of how they're managing these things. So our two buckets were diversity and connectivity. So for diversity, we looked at ecological roles, or kind of synonymous to that, functional groups. So are there diverse ecological roles here, both microbiology down to soil health up to, canopy. Species, so, and then underneath that, like under each functional group, are there a multitude of species, which would allow for redundancy. Genetic diversity, are there presence of keystone species in habitats that should have keystone species? And then are there different life stages, which I could argue, I think would be a complexity thing. Under connectivity, we had the connectivity expert come join us for this, so this is great. Corridors, unimpeded movement of species across and within habitats. And that would, drill down to the tree frog, to mule deer, or we didn't touch on it, but birds, migratory birds. Abiotic movement, so can sediment move freely downstream unimpeded? Floodplain connectivity, and this looked like, estuary floodplain connectivity to, sage grouse habitat, floodplain connectivity, mesic areas. And then one thing that I'm going to talk about because it's my idea, just the thought, like, I feel like in a lot of the state plans, and especially in my neck of the woods on the east side of the state, we manage on threat-based models and threat-based plans. And that wasn't brought up as an indicator nor an attribute. And back to like what's missing, I think we're missing threats. And so we thought maybe in the capacity to withstand or resilience, we should think about threats, both, we can have all the species diversity as we want in a sagebrush system, but if the hillside next to us is inundated with invasive annual grasses and juniper, there's a high level of threat that's going to quickly change, or is it going to be developed, at high risk for development? So anyways, just food for thought on that. Did I miss anything, group? Okay.
Questions or clarifications for the green group? Okay, did I get everybody? Okay. We heard a lot of bits and pieces. Anybody kind of hearing all those and it's starting to synthesize into a cohesive framework that gives Debbie 2 minutes to present on tomorrow? I'm picking on you. We'll help you get there. But that's kind of, I'm just curious if people are seeing how these things are starting to connect together. I can start pointing to some themes that I'm hearing, but I'm just wondering if anybody else is kind of seeing some things they want to point out while I grab my Post-its. Yeah, please. Can you grab a mic though? Sorry.
Maybe like space for natural processes to function would be one theme. And making choices now that preserve choices later.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm just looking at my notes and realized that in our group too, there was another, we didn't land this plane either, but another potential indicator that was talked about. And I think it has to do with, the capacity to adapt. It was essentially, thinking about the percent of a landscape that is converted to or occupied by the human or built environment, because that could have a direct correlation to the ability for disturbance processes to be part of that capacity and adaptation process. So I don't know if that's, I don't know if any group wants to add anything more to that, but I just didn't want to lose that. I neglected to mention that in my report out.
Another thing that we did talk about, and Andy kind of brought this up, is harkening back to the space, giving the species and everybody their space to do things, was kind of a concept of ecological flow, right? So that unimpeded, right, in terms of maybe there's a lack of infrastructure barriers, there's space for species, organisms to move as they need to in response to the short-term and the long-term threats. And so that kind of became another one of our overarching themes, that larger ecological flow concept.
Yes, space and flow. Any of the breakout group facilitators want to speak up on themes that you all were hearing? Yeah, Liz, go ahead.
Maybe one that I'm hearing that's more implicit, more from the report out, is this idea that, like, one thing our group kind of joked about is like, get humans out of the way. But I'm just struggling with the intersection of also acknowledging that humans are part of this natural system. And how do we live together, as opposed to like humans over here, animals and plants over here. We're actually all intermixed. So I'm kind of struggling a little bit with just sort of, none of these attributes seem to sort of have humans in the same space as plants and animals. But someone correct me if I'm wrong.
I think our group's something about place-based relationships with lands and waters intends to get at that fostering relationship in places. So there's at least one indicator in the room that pointed in that direction.
I mean, I heard a lot of themes around connectivity, so that idea of ecological flow, right? Really detailed stuff around floodplains, actually. So quite a lot of you talked about floodplains, both the space, the kind of lateral, longitudinal, vertical. I have to admit, longitudinal up and downstream. Yeah, thank you. It's like, oh, is that up and down too? Okay. Some of those kinds of pieces. this concept of structure, various structures. So whether that's vegetative structure, geomorphic structure, the species groups that are using particular kinds of habitat and landscapes, all those kinds of things came up. If it's okay, let's go ahead and switch gears here a little bit. You offered us your recommendations on attributes, recommendations on indicators. I'm looking for where Alexa is. Alexa, are you feeling like we've got enough to kind of digest some of this stuff and bring it back to the group with another set of questions, even as early as tomorrow or the third day? Do you have any clarifications that we need to kind of get out on the table now? Because it's gonna, I mean, I'm not picking on Sarah because she's not here, but it's gonna be our job to write this stuff up for the group to take a look at next. Okay, okay. Well, I think that's the permission we'd asked from you all, is you gave us a bunch of kind of good bits. I think on the high level attributes, you gave us an organizing frame. You told us some things that we need to make sure we pay attention to. And this is gonna need to be iterated on a lot. There's a lot of people who aren't here, so just hopefully that's okay. Jason, did you have your hand up? Oh, okay. It went above eye level, so it's like $500. So, and I want to switch gears here a little bit to say, like, what questions do you have that are remaining? So both questions that you would be interested in hearing from tribes about tomorrow. So let's start there. And then the second part of that would be like, what questions do you have remaining for the agencies? If you are an agency, I'm going to ask you to think about, what have you been hearing today that's like, oh, yeah, we totally have the data and we can totally figure out how to do some of these things, or wow, you guys were really focused on this area and I'm not sure how we're going to measure that or deal with that. So that'll be the last thing I ask you all. So what questions do you all have for tribes, both tomorrow, and then more than likely we're going to have some one-on-one conversations going forward? What perspectives would you like to hear, or what are you curious about? And I'm just looking.
I'm not finding it right now, but there was a statement in the handout about tribes often talk about things differently, and I can't find it, but that was my question when I went through the memo in advance, was it was about resilience. And it was kind of rather than the linear characteristics. So some tribal frameworks.
Was it number 8 in the
Yes, exactly.
And I think there was also some broader framing of, we were noticing that when we were looking at a tribal or indigenous framework, there was a lot about connectivity and interconnection between people and ecosystems in a symbiotic way too. You know? Okay, so just asking about language and framing.
Just, expanding on that would be great.
Okay. And then Steve, you're online with us. I won't pick on you directly, but just open invitation to just hop on in whenever you'd like to. But any other questions? Yeah, Mark, and try and grab a mic.
Do without coffee.
Thank you.
So for the folks here, there's probably some maybe lack of consensus around what function amounts to, or what we look at to determine a functional landscape. My sense is that, at least for our work, it's historical range of variation. If you could clarify with the tribes what they're looking at when they talk about first foods and so on in that reference class, about what would be good for them.
Okay. I have a note too here on what's the perspective around using non-natives for restoration as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that was part of one thing I think that's more specific that I had, because a lot of what I hear in my work with tribes is just that if there are abundant native species that are healthy and safe to consume, then that is a really powerful indicator. If the habitats are healthy, then the species are healthy, then the first foods are there.
I think the other thing that's just coming up is, for me, is maybe framing a question. I'm not exactly sure how to articulate this for tomorrow, but what is the way that this foundational cultural significance of healthy habitats that support first foods, given that that is the way of life, is so foundational, how does that show up across attributes? So is it enough to talk about diversity and connectivity, or does there need to be language around that, essentially a worldview? And so that's just a question that I have about how we talk about it and if it actually needs to be named more.
Yeah, and to the point of not just naming it, but making sure that we're being specific about it so it's never forgotten.
Right.
I would like to hear if there are existing barriers that are specific that they see to managing for resilience in the ways they would choose to. What they can tell us about those specific barriers in state governance now that maybe could be addressed through this process, at least in part.
Thank you. And I can't see behind me, but whoever's next, go for it.
Okay, I'll go next.
Perfect.
I have two things. One, I was wondering if, we could ask them, in terms of like what they see and how they define, a good system and resilience. What is their perspective on how you translate what they've done since, time immemorial to Western science, so that we can, that the state agencies can perhaps define metrics that resonate with the tribes. And then the second part is, what is perhaps their vision for, and I know this is a loaded term because we brought it up, but I'm going to say it because I don't have a better one right now, for co-stewardship, for resilient habitats into the future. And then the final thing I wanted to ask you guys is just like the way you have this set up tomorrow. I'm just wondering if you guys might be able to help me better understand this. In bringing tribal participants here, we are hoping to get their perspective and ideas and information by starting the day presenting to them what we did here. How do you hope that contributes to what you hope to elicit from them?
Yeah, well, and I think it's a bit of a flexible conversation. I forget exactly how we have it. I thought we had started with introductions where the tribes can offer to us what's important to them first. And then Sarah and Debbie can present a synthesis of where we are today. And it's a bit of call and response and conversation back and forth, but then also space for the tribes to make requests of us.
Can I add to that, Bobby?
Please.
I also just want to take a moment and acknowledge that Steve Rondo from Klamath Tribes has been with us, I think, all day today. I think Troy Baker from Umatilla has been off and on. And I think these 3 days were structured around the multiple relationships that state agencies and our partners have with tribes, right? So today we're here as content experts, all of us, and that's included tribal staff participation. Tomorrow, we're looking to view our tribal colleagues through more of a government to government lens and give an opportunity for that more formal sort of, sharing of ideas back and forth. And in the third day, we hope to have tribal staff with us as well, kind of as co-implementers and folks who are working shoulder to shoulder on similar natural resource issues around the state. And so I don't want that framing to get lost. I don't want us to pretend that Steve hasn't been or other folks haven't been participating today or to lose that. And, it's appropriate for us to hold some separate space as well. So that's kind of the 3-step process that we've been aiming for. We also know that folks, our tribal staff partners have a lot of commitments. And so we'll find time to circle back for folks who weren't able to make it to this meeting either. virtually or physically. It came together fairly quickly, and we'll have a lot of follow-up to make sure that we do attend to all three of those types of relationships, state and tribal, over the continuation of this process.
Yeah, thanks for that, Sarah.
Bobby, two other just quick topics for consideration or thought for tomorrow and going forward. I think one would be sort of thoughts on and reflections on traditional ecological knowledge as they relate to sort of the metrics, and sort of the flip side of what you had said is sort of translating that into Western sort of ways of thinking. But are there ways of incorporating traditional ecological knowledge and how we're thinking about measuring success or thinking about success? And the other is sort of the temporal aspect, is sort of thinking about 7 generations, and that's such an influential part of Indigenous culture. And it really is, I think, a big part of how this group is thinking about long-term. And so how might tribal perspectives on that influence how we think about resilience? Because I think it's built into the structure of how tribes already are thinking about their interactions.
And urgency.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Great. Cool. Thank you. So the next question is, what do you have what questions do you have remaining for agencies? So we want to start feeding some of these kind of questions back to the agencies, getting ready for day 3, getting ready for tomorrow. You just spent all day kind of thinking about attributes and indicators. What questions do you still have that we need to try and answer and queue up for you on day 3 or for the agencies?
All right. I am with an agency. I'm with DEQ, but I'm going to throw one out that I've been contemplating, and I hope it's worthwhile for other agencies, which is we're not likely to get more resources, and we're not likely to have our existing legal mandates go away. So how are we going to implement a climate resilience framework using the resources and using the statutory structures and obligations that we have? Right.
I mean, this is step 1. This is identifying attributes, and then there's a lot of work that needs to happen to use those attributes, to better define them and then use them. So a little bit more on what comes next and how does this all fit together would be great.
And Kathy, fit together with what? Everything else going on, or?
Sorry. Just the better understanding of what the implementation plan is for this work. What's step 2, step 3, step 4? It doesn't have to be a lot of detail, but the commission is named as a partner in working on this, along with the climate mitigation side of the work that we're doing. And, having a little clearer vision would be super helpful.
Great.
I asked this in our small group, but Sarah had such a good answer. I'd like to ask it again so it can be brought.
I'm sure it was that Sarah.
No,
Possibly that Sarah.
one of the Sarahs had a really good answer. Struck me that we didn't come up with any new ecological theories, as someone said here. So, and a lot of the knowledge that we've brought to our sticky notes and our maps are things that people have already known and that the agencies have already known within your own staff. And so how is what we've done today contributing to a different way of doing business? And how will it, again, just kind of that idea of how will the agencies connect these ecological principles and attributes together in the way they manage the lands that
Nicole,
they
I talked for kind of an embarrassingly long time.
It was
after
great.
You said that. Was there a part that particularly resonated?
Which I just remember it was great. It was a great answer.
I think there think there were two parts of that. I mean, one is we didn't think that you all were going to make up new ecological principles that we hadn't thought of yet as a collective set of societies. And there's this sort of, as we mull this stuff over, you can see the paths that people take. And it's almost like, what are those called when people make paths through parks? Social trails. Like you can see where people's brains go, and I can see where a lot of brains are going in this room, and start to see how to prioritize that. But the other thing, and I think I actually probably stole this from the folder, so we'll see, but is that part of what we see in this is an opportunity for the agencies to have, like Jeff said this morning, kind of a shared true north. Whereas we've operated appropriately legally according to our pre-existing mandates that were all kind of created in isolation and then knit together. And it's one thing to sort of sit there each with our own mandate and figure out how to work together. And we do, we call each other, we talk, we really do our best, and you know, interagency coordination. But to be able to say, like, this is the thing that all the natural resource agencies have in common as a long-term vision, and it's you know, it contains multitudes. It's not like a single goal. But that would be, I think, kind of groundbreaking for us to be able to say, like, here are some things that we know are super relevant and important to Oregonians in this time of changing climate. And then each of our agencies understand how we contribute to that and are able to sort of show our work and show that and show how we work alongside partners in that. That to me is like kind of the more detailed version of what Jeff described this morning as like a true north for agencies and figuring out how we work together in this changing climate. But it really is, it's a cool opportunity. And I know this conversation can feel really swirly. And I do want to reassure folks that it's very helpful to be a part of it and to see where those social paths sort of develop and lead, and we can use that to kind of craft a way forward. Was that about it? Never try to repeat anything that you said. It's very dangerous.
I was going to have a question for agencies tomorrow, the next day. Can I lodge those? No. You know, one of the things that I was sitting here thinking about is when I'm listening to this discussion, my mind is going to places like sagebrush country or like and then you go and you look in some of our urbanized areas and you go, well, what do you do with that as a state? Right. So anyway, I just throw that into the hopper of like, what are we going to do about that? Bobby.
I was going to give you an answer. Now I'm not. No, but I think Pete you started talking about some of that, like percent impervious area, or some of your indicators started talking about that relative to structure, connectivity, species presence, and composition. That just like that's important for under the ground and soil health, you can extrapolate that into urban environments too, right?
I guess I was thinking more about choices, future choices, and and you know, so, you know, when the rubber hits the road and you're making a choice about where do you shore up resiliency, hold the line, or invest.
Gotcha. Thanks for clarifying that. I saw Andy, then Kirsten, and then Mike.
Flip some papers. I think just from an NGO standpoint, I think one of the questions I'll have leaving is where do you need additional help? Thinking about this, implementing it, you're right, like just all of those things. Like, so from an agency, I think that'd be something for us to hear more about.
Are you starting to see ways to help already?
Yeah, but like too many. So
okay.
Yes.
Well, I will just say
I've got a
that
binder of ideas.
Perfect. Whether you're an agency person, a tribe, an NGO, anybody, if you're seeing ways that you could be helpful, please tell us that right now. There may be too many ways to decide, but if we know what those possibilities are, we can kind of bring them forth. Kristen.
Thanks, Bobby. I think this is so helpful. I mean, to Sarah's point of kind of state agencies working from the same side of the table, I think this is really a fantastic opportunity. And I just want to say thank you to I'm also to say thank you to everyone here for sharing your knowledge. It's far deepens and extends what we could have done just as state agencies. So please don't leave us now. We will need everybody. The in cities is really intriguing. I just would also, along the line of partnerships, not forget local governments. So there's a whole set of things that local governments do inside their urban growth boundaries to provide canopy and riparian corridors and habitat that we wouldn't want to lose sight of. I'm still thinking about the question for tribes, Bobby. So maybe tomorrow for Steve and others to answer is what the right structure is for ongoing consultation and coordination, how to best use the structures that exist, the social paths that have been laid, to use Sarah's term, which is the natural resources and cultural resources working groups, the clusters. So all the natural resource agencies have sort of an obligation to be attending those and working with tribes and understanding that natural resources are cultural resources and back and forth. I wouldn't necessarily recommend one or the other, but sometimes there's joint meetings and be interested in the tribes giving us perspective on that. That's not a consultative space. I've heard it stated that it's a coordination and collaboration space, but so not to forego a formal government to government strategy, but thank you. Just some last thing.
Yeah, this is going to get at a few things that have been brought up in terms of next steps and urban environments, and I heard NGOs and local governments. I think my question, to the ultimate framework, and maybe it's outside the scope of this workshop, but you have a lot of people from outside the state agencies here. So you're starting to develop some ownership outside of the state agencies. So how do you engage your partners to fill those resource gaps in urban areas or federal lands or whatever the case may be? I think there's probably space for that. If you guys have a framework that you can bring to the table, I would think that partners would be like, thank you. This is something that we can take and we can start implementing or applying, or at least, develop something that's in alignment with that. So I think there's some opportunities there.
Thanks for saying that, Mike. And I think too, if that idea of like, if we came to a federal agency with a framework, just making sure the answer is, yeah, thank you. That's great. Let's figure out how to work, rather than I didn't do that. Yeah, so if you have ideas on how best to do that, any of our federal partners, let us know. Pete and then Heather.
Yeah, I brought this up in our group, and it was sort of sparked from preparation, thinking about this workshop and then comments here today. But my mind sort of went to some of the existing established frameworks to think about climate adaptation, and in particular, I'm sure folks are familiar with like the RRT, the resilience, resistance, transition frameworks. And so I think it's a two-part question for the agencies. One is, are we effectively lumping those three sort of pathways for climate adaptation into this one concept and conversation around resilience and the resilience EO? And then if yes or no, depending on the answer, would we need to think about the indicators of attributes for resilience versus resistance versus transition as we try to break up these large landscapes into places where we might pursue different outcomes for climate adaptation? Would the indicators be different?
Do you have an idea about that, Pete?
Yeah, I've got it all figured out, but hey, I'll wait till tomorrow. No, I don't.
Okay. I don't. So I did. I mean, the idea of existing frameworks and how much to tie into those existing frameworks as much as possible, because they've already gotten so far in certain things, versus no, we really need something that fits the existing legal and practical structures that Oregon partners have. It's both and, probably. Heather, and then Das.
No.
Then after this, I'm gonna wait.
Now you're waiting.
I'm waiting. I just recognize that several of the indicators we did come back to today and advance are things you would achieve through development decisions. And I would have a question to the agencies of whether there's bandwidth and scope for the governor's office to make directives or calls from this framework to not environment agencies that would align with some of these indicators. And there's a federal example of that working well for resilient infrastructure, where there's principles from an environmental resilience framework that were put out from OMB as infrastructure guidance. That is a very viable way that you then have NOFOs going out the door that allow choices that align with actually achieving on the landscape the kinds of indicator changes that we're talking about. So my question would just be, is there a scope for this to go beyond the environment agencies at some point so that the same signals are getting given to the agencies that have a lot of the funds to drive the actions that are going to actually change the landscapes and seascapes?
Heather might have just answered the question that I was going to pose to agencies, but my question is kind of three parts. I think one question that I've had throughout the day is how are individual agencies and how as a whole is the state measuring success in this initiative? And then what are the current barriers that exist right now that are impeding them reaching that success? And then how is this executive order addressing those barriers and allowing them to achieve success?
So maybe just a comment and then I don't know, a challenge or a request at the end. I wasn't really sure what to expect when I came to this meeting today, and I found myself inspired many, many times over. And it seems like we're all pretty well on the same page about a lot of things, which I think if that's the only outcome that we have here, I think it's pretty amazing that we have so much consensus about what's important and what we should concentrate on and how we should measure it. I also can't help but like take note that there's a certain portion of what we're all doing here today that's compulsory. And so, and at some point there will be some other administration and there will be some other set of executive orders, and many of our careers and the careers of our staff will transcend those administrations. So knowing that we all think all of this stuff is so important and so critical, like just, I guess, challenging us all to think about strategically how we pick the things that we're going to chase and how we integrate them in a way that's durable over time, and that in 3 or 4 years when there's some new EO, that all this stuff, all this work, all this passion, all doesn't just go out the window. So like finding ways to pick the things that have durability and staying power over time.
Great questions. Anything else?
I was going to say something very similar, but also sort of to the agency partners. I think thinking strategically about, is there not just sort of from a content perspective, what are the areas that have durability, but also are there ways to structure the work that allow it to persist over the time horizons we're thinking about, and build it into the structures of your agencies and work plans or staffing plans, or I don't know what the right dials to turn, but that give the durability both in substance and in form in how the agencies work. So thinking about that.
Since there's not going to be additional money for monitoring and the like, I'm just curious if the agencies or whoever can work on success metrics so that we know that the kind of things that we're saying need to happen, if y'all agree on that, we can actually track agency progress towards, because it's obviously not going to be manifested in terms of new programs, lots of dollars and so on. So just thinking about that.
Great, that sounds good. And I think the agencies might need to say there's no new resources for agencies at the moment. That doesn't mean there's not philanthropy or federal agencies or other kinds of partners that can move things forward if you all decide it's a priority. Okay, anything else? All right, I'm gonna check in and let's think, well, then I'll go into next steps for tomorrow and the third day. But Sarah, Alexa, Debbie, any kind of closing thoughts or anything before we kind of close down for the day that you want to make sure we get before we leave?
A lot for us to work on tonight.
There is a lot. Yeah.
I'm suddenly remembering that Bobby told us that his superpower was synthesis. And so that's exciting that he's still going to be here when we let you guys go, which is fantastic. No, I just want to echo other folks. This has been probably a much more helpful conversation than it looked or felt like. It was really great. And we'll continue to make it more complex every day until it doesn't feel too easy anymore, until folks stop coming, I would think. But it was designed stepwise, and we got more indifferent, I think, than we expected today. So we probably do need to huddle a little bit after folks leave today and think about how best to frame up our next two sets of conversations. Unless you were about to tell us that, Bobby, in which case, please do.
Just the logistics of who needs to show up where and when.
Yeah, that's good too.
But any other kind of thoughts or reflections?
Thank you, Bobby.
Well, I'm happy to do that, but just the thanks go all around. So giant thank you to all of you. Let's give big thanks to Michelle and Myrna and the rest of the ODFW team that's been here all day. The OWEB team, I don't know if you saw kind of Nicole and Ivy sneaking back and forth. So giant thank yous to the OWEB team for pulling this off, and you know, Liz and Aaron and Kim and Robin, thank you all for all the work, but mostly thank you to you all. Logistics. First off, did I forget any thank yous? Okay, thank you. Katie Pierman, also thank you. She's not able to be here. She has serious FOMO for not being here, and she has FOMO from vacation for not being here. So that's how excited she was. Ritter's tonight is at 6 p.m. So we've got that reservation set up. No reason for you all to wait till 6 p.m. if you want to go over there. The reservation is under Bobby. Have fun. I'll be there at 6. So that's there. We start at 8:30 tomorrow. So we'll start right there where with intros from tribes at the moment. We're hoping to have the Umatillas, the Klamath, and the Cow Creek join us at 8:30 in the morning. And then that'll be our chance first to hear from the tribes on what's important to them. We'll try and type up these questions and share them this evening. And then at 9:30, that's Sarah and Debbie's chance to kind of share a synthesis of what we came up with today with the tribes to get some of the feedback. And then we have a working lunch that you all are certainly invited to come. If you've RSVP'd, we're expecting you to come. If that's changed for whatever reason, please let us know. But that's the working lunch is planning to start at 12:30. What that exactly looks like, I'm asking Grace for you all, for us to synthesize and understand what this is, what we need to ask of you, because I'm not totally sure what that might be. If you have ideas, come find me or anyone on the facilitation team, but I'm guessing it could be a continuation of what you just did. Just guessing. And that'll adjourn at 3 o'clock. And then on day 3, so Thursday, we'll start at 8:30 with a welcoming. And that's kind of turning it right over to the implementers and the agencies to say, okay, what's the implementation plan look like? How is this going to be operational? How might we actually look at floodplain connectivity when we don't do any of that now, or we do it in these ways? Okay. Any questions on other kinds of logistics? If you don't mind, we are going to reuse the name tags. So please drop your name tags in the front on the way out. Bonus points if your first name is AB, kind of putting it towards that side. Bonus points if your name is S, putting it on the other side. Otherwise,
Sarah's just make a big pile in the middle.
Sarah's have their own row.
You have their own row.
But thank you all. Big round of applause. Big travels home, and we'll see if you're one of the organizing team or the facilitation team, you mind huddle up here. We'll talk about what we want to do. And if there's worksheets or other things that folks want to turn in, just make sure those are really close to the map with all the Post-its from your team. And that your name is on it in case we have questions. Thanks. Folks online, thank you for hanging with us. We really appreciate it. Have a great evening, and you're welcome to join us at 8:30 tomorrow morning. Thanks, Lise. Ciao.